And we are recording. First of all, thanks to everyone who is watching this video. I am your host, Abraham El Jaguar. And before anything else, this channel is proudly sponsored by the Demon Ninja Kickstarter, a tabletop RPG of horror and redemption in a dark Japan. Please check out the links in the description and in the pinned comment. They will take you to the Kickstarter and to my ongoing review of the core book and the Red Room Publishing. Please check out the link to their store in the description and in the comment as well. You will find exclusive tabletop RPG products there. There. Sorry. Okay. I'm really happy to present this video. I have Mildra the monk and Xanatrix Sadar. That's the way how you pronounce it? Sadar?
Zadare.
Sadare. Thank you so much for being here, Mildra and Xanatrix.
Thank you for having us. We enjoy being had.
I'm glad that we're here even after all of the particular snafus from earlier.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great because today, for everyone that doesn't know, we are going to talk about the influences that exist between tabletop RPGs and video games. And I also tossed the anime in there, but because I'm sure that anime is going to find some sort of way into the conversation. It's a domain that usually dips its feet in other domains' pools. So before we go into the subject matter, please, Mildra, tell us how you got into tabletop RPGs.
Well, it's a bit of a funny story. Then again, most of them are. It was a dark and stormy night. No, I'm not doing that gag. I don't live in Jersey. I'm not doing the laboratory of Dr. Weird kind of stuff. Oh, but oddly enough, my journey when it came to TTRPGs did not start directly with TTRPGs, but actually started with game books. In particular, stuff like the Choose Your Own Adventure books, as well as stuff like Fighting Fantasy and Lone Wolf. Lone Wolf, I have a lengthy relationship with. Fighting Fantasy, a little bit less so. I mean, I've had a few of the books, mainly Warlock of Firetop Mountain, but I haven't gone through the original version of that in years. And a Star Wars game book called Assault on Yavin 4.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, because of the fact that I was this massive bookworm, I've told the story about how I would go into bookstores at like 10 a.m. and I wouldn't leave until closing time. Just sit. If they didn't want me to leave, don't make such comfy chairs. But eventually I got roped into being a player in an AD&D campaign. This would have been the mid to late 90s. So this was during the Black Book era of AD&D, which a lot of people who keep swearing by AD&D conveniently forget this era, or think of it as the worst because of the Lady of Pain.
Uh-huh.
But that introduced me to the concept, and I'm like, wait, I can just make a character. I'm like, oh, all right. However, because of the fact that I didn't want to do just fantasy even back then, because I was as much of a Power Rangers and Hercules and all that stuff. I was a 90s kid, as I've made no bones about. And I wanted to try other things. This eventually led me to GURPS. And GURPS has been my whipping boy ever since for various reasons.
I can feel his pain.
You want an easy way to trigger me? Have your book not have an index. But eventually I started experimenting with various books and roped myself into being a forever GM while I was still a teenager, which for the most part hasn't changed. I think the forever DM thing was inevitable because of my habit of taking control of a given situation. Even when I've done day jobs, I've gotten the nickname of the boss, even when I'm not the boss.
Listen, boss, you need to tell me what to do.
I'm right there with him. I'm the de facto team lead on a team that doesn't have a lead position.
Yeah. Um, eventually, I would find a LGS that who the guy behind it I've been friends with for years, even though he's a bit weird. There's an unwritten rule that upon first DMing at his place, you bring him a sandwich.
Mm.
Don't ask me why. It's just the rules. I ended up getting a bit of a surprise. I ended up surprising him because instead of a peanut butter and jelly or a ham and cheese or something like that, I made him a Reuben.
Reuben.
And there was also the fact that when and just to illustrate how him and I seem to have been best frenemies over the years. When a bunch of people for Free RPG Day one year were kept bringing up Matt Mercer, I was like, I need a Wayne's World style sign that says absolutely no Matt Mercer. You know, like the whole no stairway in in Wayne's World.
Mhm.
No stairway denied.
And I end up seeing that exact sign up on the wall about a week later. just saying absolutely no Matt Mercer. Which I was half joking when I made that comment. I didn't think he'd actually do it.
Mm.
In hindsight, I should have known better. But ever since I was in my teens, I've been a treasure hunter when it comes to various games. Some experiences better than others. I've already mentioned the whole thing with Rifts, and one thing led to another, and I just kept expanding my horizons on it, much like I expand my horizons with every other hobby that I'm into. I don't have the capacity to just be comfortable with some security blanket. And eventually, because I was annoyed that there were so many interesting games that weren't being talked about, I decided to do it myself. Things escalated, and the rest is history.
Mm.
Yep.
There is a logical progression there, but before we move to Xanatrix, why did you choose the name Mildra?
Mildra, when I met up with one of my relatives, she had mentioned Mildra as a potential warlock name. Now, of course, when I actually spoke with practicing Wicca, I ended up finding out that that's not how that works. And I like the name, and I was like, that the origin may have been full of shit, but I'm going to claim it so that people think of me when they hear Mildred instead of whatever she had planned.
Mm.
I know that there's a town in Australia that has that name, and a town in Sweden that has that name. That kind of thing is total coincidence. I've never been to Australia, and I've never been to Sweden. For the longest time, I had considered going to Austria just so I could visit the town of fucking.
Of course.
Although there is a place called Mianus in Florida.
Mm.
Mianus.
I think they pronounce it Mianus, but you can take that joke with you right out the door, monk.
If it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it sure as hell ain't a goose.
Unless it's Florida, then it could just be a human on bath salts.
No, it's just an alligator.
That's true.
I have learned the hard way that if there's any body of water that you encounter in Florida, there's probably a gator in it.
The hard way, but you're not missing any limbs.
No, that's because I don't have to outrun the bad guys. I just have to outrun the slowest guy in the party.
But John's not missing any limbs either.
That's because he's smart.
Oh, so it's Mike Shell who's missing a finger.
No, Mike Shell might wish that was the case. No, he gets screwed over by the dice gods every time he rolls dice.
Ooh.
I don't want to keep picking on him. Mike Shell's a friend of mine who's been in some of my games, and he has horrible luck.
And
We keep
horrible
picking on him.
ideas.
And horrible ideas. We keep picking on him, and normally I don't try singling someone out for their moments of stupidity. But when you keep feeding, you get what you've got coming.
When I heard the luck part, I thought, well, maybe he should play diceless RPGs. But then you said the horrible ideas. Ooh.
We have to tell him the normal story about Mike at this point.
Should I go with the one about the shield?
Yes.
So, about 5 or so years ago, I had GM'd a Common Writer themed TTRPG. It was an absolute mess. I had a house rule about 12 pages worth of stuff, which I don't like doing. But I had everyone come up with a custom weapon, and he came up with it was essentially a tower shield that had a hidden turret in it. So he could plant the shield in front of him and then hang back and suppressive fire.
Mm-hmm.
Second campaign in, he decides to start throwing the shield like he's Captain fucking America. And then using his powers to call the shield back.
Mm-hmm.
And I have never let that go.
So let me see if I understand it correctly. Do you have a shield, and it when you place it on the ground, it turns into a turret, like a gun turret?
Yes, that was the intent. He had a gun shield.
But I was thinking, if he could throw the shield, and if he had some sort of psychic powers, wouldn't he be able to activate the shield and start shooting everyone, the shield spinning around, shooting people in a very chaotic way?
That would have been a better idea than what he did.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know if it would have worked within the system.
It probably wouldn't have, but you're thinking a bit further ahead than he was.
And he just threw the shield like it's Captain America, literally.
Mm-hmm.
I see.
And I gave him shit for that, and every opportunity I have given him shit for that, along with other things. Because again, I don't like picking. I don't usually relish in picking on someone like that, but he opens himself up to that. So if you're gonna put bait in the water, the fish are eventually gonna bite.
Maybe he does it on purpose to create some sort of personality quirk. Oh, that's his thing.
No, I don't.
No.
I don't think he's doing it on purpose in that sense. I don't think he's doing it to troll me in the same way that if Zan was doing that kind of thing, it would be with the deliberate intent of fucking with me.
He's not wrong. It's not like I created an XP of a Final Fantasy VI character for an entire campaign or anything just to get under your skin.
Pretty much. And when it can, throughout the years as I've done the whole thing. Originally, I was just going to be a reviewer. Then I started doing podcasts. Then I started doing interviews, and everything just escalated because I had this mindset of, let's see how far I can take this before I can't take it. Well,
he's still going, and we have to drag him into his own vacations. He doesn't want to stop.
I have to get bullied into taking vacations, yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really cool addiction, if I have to say something.
But
now, Xanatrix, when it comes to your name, Xanatrix Sadar, where does it come from?
Comes from the very first TTRPG character I ever made.
And did you just come up with the name, or is it based on something else?
I was a tiny kid. I thought X and Z were the coolest letters in the alphabet. I'm still a tiny kid at heart, and X and Z are still the coolest letters in the English alphabet, and anyone who wants to say different can fucking fight me. And I just started putting things together and making sounds I thought were cool, and also didn't sound like they were normal humans, because my very first character was a half-elf thief in 2nd edition. AD&D. AD&D 2. But the story behind Xan being what he is these days, I started playing TTRPGs when I was 4 with a lot of help, a heavy helping dose from the guy who introduced me to it, because I was 4. My parents were trying to run their own small entrepreneurial business. They were running a local ISP for the small city we lived in. And I was always underfoot because I'm not in school yet, and I'm 4. So they ask the teenager they're paying to do some of the menial stuff at the ISP to babysit, essentially.
Mm.
And so he pulls out his AD&D 2 books and starts showing me pictures of the monsters and all the cool stuff. Eventually, he helps me roll up a character, and I create Xan. 4 years later, I managed to trick a very inexperienced DM into giving me an ungodly amount of experience by using a Ring of Wish. And so Xan is now so powerful that I retired him into the stratosphere. I have fucked with people in my campaigns using him by giving them things and then making Xan make them forget about him, because if they remember him, their heads will explode. That sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll be like, so what happened to that guy? And I look at the table. I'm like, what guy? Like the guy who gave us the stuff. I'm like, gave you what stuff? My favorite one was a guy managed to roll so well that the item I had to give him was an indestructible ego weapon. An indestructible weapon that had its own ego and was on good terms with him. He's like, he gave me this ego sword last night. I'm like, how? What the hell, man? Why would you forget the sword you've had for the past year? Are you the adventures you've had? What's wrong with you? He's like, but I just got this last night. No, you don't. You clearly got this a year ago. Don't you remember? It was in that one labyrinth. And everybody looks at me and like, what are you doing? I'm like, what do you mean, what am I doing? They're like, the guy. They're out of character now, but I'm still playing. And I'm just like, what guy? There was no guy. There was a thunderstorm last night. You all went to sleep. The thunderstorm's gone. What's wrong? And they all just gave me the biggest stink eye, but I like fucking with players a little much sometimes.
The games that you run sound to be quite challenging in that aspect.
They can be. I try to keep things interesting depending on who I'm with. I try to play to the strengths of the table, because not everybody's going to have fun the same way in the same game. And not everybody even wants to play the same game. I certainly don't want to play D&D anymore, but god damn, everybody else around me wants to play it. But I always try to keep things fun, interesting, and a little wacky, because everything can't be serious 100% of the time. Then you have no catharsis. You don't get a lot of the laughter at the table. You want those moments of your entire table just cracking up at something. You want those moments of the table cheering in triumph. You want the moments of your table looking at you like, what the hell is happening right now? The most confused looks on their faces. You want their emotions as the players, especially, not even as their characters, but the players themselves. I know that they're enjoying when they're emoting at me. When I have people who are less expressive, even when they like crack a small smile or have a small chuckle, it's an accomplishment for me. I'm like, that person's usually just kind of in their own world, but I got them to react. that means they're enjoying what's happening, and that's what's important to me.
I handle all of that within character because it feels like it's like pulling on a bowstring. If they try to keep things in character, the laughter or any other emotion kind of like bubbles up until they cannot hold it in anymore. And then even if they try, sometimes they laugh, they chuckle. But for me to boost that emotion, I prefer to handle it everything within character, and everything else is like an accident.
Yeah, I definitely try to handle everything in the game, but as I used with the example of Zan showing up, giving a guy an ego sword, and then now he's had it for a year, but just doesn't remember that because, well, Zan erased and modified your memories so that your heads don't explode. I'm telling them in game, you've had that sword for a year. How can you not remember all the adventures you've been on with that sword? And it's at that point that the players, they're not even reacting as their characters anymore. The players are looking at me with what the fuck, man? Look, like, what are you doing here? I'm like, and then they go back to it and they start role playing it. And my favorite part of that specific part was the guy that got the sword. He's like, he starts crying. He starts describing himself crying. And everybody else is like, what's wrong? He's like, I thought I forgot about him. I'm like, yes, this is what I wanted. Please go along with the idea. Just go for it. And it's those moments, just that pinging back and forth between the GM and the players and everything coming together. It's just so good. And that's what I enjoy about running a game. I also like to play, which I'm eternally glad that the Monk is GMing some of our current games. But Monk, if we ever run Final Fantasy Legend, I want to be the first one to GM it if I can, please. That way you can play for one.
Yeah, and I'm perfectly fine. I'm perfectly fine with it, especially since, well, 9 times out of 10, I'm doing not just the GM work, but a lot of the heavy lifting.
The world building and story building and everything else, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As for where my inspiration for games comes from, like when you asked Mildra, I have been reading novels for a very long time. My mom taught both my sister and I to read at a very young age. By the time I was about 4, I was reading actual chapter books, like not the thickest novels, but chapter books meant for kids like 12 to 14. And so I eventually got my hands on things like Harry Harrison's Stainless Steel Rat series, one of my favorite sci-fi series, along with the Lensman series. Super good sci-fi. I am a big fan of sci-fi and space opera, but I also got to cut my teeth on some of what people usually call the classics: Tolkien, Howard, Moorcock, Burroughs. So yes. I didn't need to go the full list. Thank you, Monk.
And I was thinking Moorcock because you both have white hair. So, well, in the avatars. Yeah.
Oh man, he's calling us out there, Monk. But the books that I've read over the years have always informed not just my inspirations. They inform a lot of different things about me, including my own way of getting through life, especially when I found the Sword of Truth novel series by the late Terry Goodkind. The Wizard's Rules actually really helped to inform my own personal moral system. So that was probably one of the most formative book series in my life. But then, of course, also being a 90s kid, video games, comic books, when Japanese media got much more popular and actually started getting shipped over here, manga, anime, movies. I have dipped into every entertainment medium I could touch. Anything I could learn from, I did learn from. And this may start sounding kind of like why does it sound like second verse same as the first? Monk and I have always said we are a lot more similar in many respects than people realize. Insatiable appetites for knowledge, an interest in always pushing beyond our borders, beyond our boundaries to become more than what we were. An sometimes unhealthy appetite for knowledge, because eventually you hit that knowledge that is just another case where you need eye bleach. Monk knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
but and then of course people then go, well, do you also have read the whole library story? And I'm like, yes, I remember. And for me, I remember the city it was in. I remember how the library looks and what street it's on. I can point it out on Google Maps if I ever want to. Although now it's turned into a police station because the libraries got shut down in my home county. It's sad. And it was not a very large library. It was probably at most 1,500 square feet, maybe a little bit larger. Or maybe I'm underestimating that because I'm a big guy and remember it from a big guy's viewpoint. I don't know, but there were probably a little over 3,000 books there, 3 or 4,000. And whether it was fiction or nonfiction, I tried to read everything there, even the stuff that was in languages I didn't understand, because they had some books from France and from Spain and from Latin America in there. So,
But it really makes sense because, for example, when Gary Gygax and James M. Ward met, they actually, in a bookstore, they had the exact same books. They were purchasing the exact same books. I don't remember the exact titles, but I think there were 6 or 7 books, and they were the same books. And that's how they met. Oh, you have the same books that I am carrying. Because you said you had things in common between you.
Yeah, the way that Zan and I had met through a Facebook group that we were in, and around that time I was in full swing doing reviews, and I had planned on doing a more in-depth review of the Spanish RPG Anima Beyond Fantasy. And the idea was I was going to because one of the segments I do is building a character. I was going to have 4 characters be built. One that was using the skill system, one that was using ki, one that was using magic, one that was using psionic. The idea was I would build one of them, and I'd have one different person build each different character aside from that. Well, the other people who said that they were going to do it bailed, and the only person who stuck around was Zan. And then him and I got to talking, and then eventually one thing led to another, and we started doing the shows.
There's a really funny video in Spanish from a woman in Spain about anima. It has the little animations, and it's supposed to be a guy trying to learn how to play anima. And the game master appears and hands him a book. And he's like, oh, those are the rules? They look easy. I thought the rule book would be thicker. And the game master is like, no, that's the character sheet. These are the rules. And he pulls out the mountains.
I am of the belief that I will not have anyone complain to me about a given game being too complicated, because if they do, I will throw every single game that I have that was done by Fantasy Games Unlimited back in the 90s and use that as a beat stick.
On a side note, if anyone does want to watch the very first collaboration between myself and the Monk, it's Gaming Monk Review number 16 for Anima Beyond Fantasy.
I did do a follow-up when I finally managed to get a translation of Core Exet, which is kind of a revised version of the core book. The weird thing is that material that referenced Core Exet got translated during the FFG era, but not Core Exet itself. I didn't bring Zan along for that one because there wasn't it's a revised version of something I'd already tackled. I didn't see a point in redoing character creation cover that kind of thing. And eventually, I decided to try my hand at doing podcasting. The original form was Monastery Live, which was a news-based thing. But I wanted to have a focus more on the stupid kind of news, like Florida Man stories or Darwin Award winners. And just because it's called Florida Man doesn't mean that every story that we covered was what had somebody stupid in Florida. Any other state or any other state in the U.S. or country around the world can have a Florida Man story. I think one of my favorites was the case with that guy in Africa who decided to nurse a baby hippo that he found as a pet, even though everybody in his life was telling him don't do that. Then sometime later he gets killed by hippos. Can't imagine why. Mystery for the ages, you know?
For context, hippopotami are extremely violent animals.
And it's quite interesting. I saw a video clip where a crocodile was attacking a zebra, and the hippos came to the rescue. They attacked the crocodile, and they left the zebra alone. The crocodile was long gone, and the zebra was there in front of the hippos, and they didn't care about the zebra.
Probably because zebras, calling them the ass of Africa is actually fairly accurate because they are related to donkeys. And there's the fact that, well, each one of them is a bastard, both literally and figuratively. But one of the great injustices of the world is the fact that hippos have been portrayed in popular media as the lovable fat guy of the animal kingdom. That couldn't be further from the truth.
I love the way they represent them in Congo in the film. Do you remember that scene? And there was this like boat, and they were moving at night, during the night, crossing the river, and the horrible monster starts biting at them, and anyone who didn't know about hippos knew all about them thanks to that scene.
Mm-hmm. But when it comes to and of course, eventually I stopped doing that particular show around 2020 because stories started getting really repetitive, and it was starting to wear on some of our mental health because so many stories were about the lockdowns, and I needed to shift things. So I shifted into a topic-based podcast known as Geek Watch, which continues to this day. And the thing is, doing things like Monastery Live and then Valley of the Judge and other things, it ended up giving me more confidence to experiment with more concepts as a entertainer. And because even though tabletop is certainly the focus, one of the things I had stated I didn't want to do right out of the gate was I did not want to be another goddamn D&D channel.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's enough of that, and I don't want to perpetuate this idea that that's the only game that exists or has ever existed. I was one of the many people who gave Bell of Lost Souls shit when they did that whole let's play D&D with Cyberpunk Edgerunners, or adapting the cast of that particular series into D&D, and I'm like, Cyberpunk Red is over there, you motherfuckers.
Yes, a lot of people have fallen in love with the Dungeons and Dragons system, and I think we can definitely explore some other avenues for entertainment with the subject of this video, because there is so much potential when it comes to enjoying tabletop RPGs and in any style, in exploring other domains, other ways, other themes, even though there is no genre that could be considered, oh, the video game genre in tabletop RPGs. There is an interesting relationship between the origins of um, tabletop RPGs and video games,
Oh
because
yeah.
the Colossal Cave, of course, you probably already know that Colossal Cave, the first computer adventure game, was completely based on Dungeons and Dragons. Did you know about that?
Yeah, I was also aware of the attempt to do D&D in the Plato engine back in the 70s. Um, Plato, if you're not familiar, could be considered an early precursor to personal computers.
Mhm.
And eventually eventually through stuff like that you end up with things like Zork, which was, I won't say Zork was the first adventure game, but it was definitely one of the earliest ones that got widely distributed.
And it's interesting that in recent times there seems to be more exploration, at least when it comes to the indie side. A lot of indie designers are trying to come up with these tabletop RPGs in the style of Zelda, in the style of Final Fantasy. You have plenty of Dungeons and Dragons books that attempt to do that. Like they're actually one. It's Pathfinder. It's basically like a derivative from Dungeons and Dragons, but there are some books by Fat Goblin Games that allow you to play Legend of Zelda with Pathfinder or Castlevania.
Yeah,
Uh,
I've seen that. I don't find that as an I may have found that kind of thing more interesting if it weren't for the fact that there that within the indies and within certain free and fan games, the idea of doing video game in TTRPG had not only been well traveled, but traveled in a way that wasn't trying to shove a round peg into a square hole.
hmm.
Uh,
I understand everybody trying to adapt their favorite enterprise, whichever it is, whatever franchise they might like, into the most ubiquitous RPG in the West. Let's be honest here. D&D's value is in the fact that it's been a hegemon of the Western TTRPG scene, or at least the North American TTRPG RPG, excuse me, mouth scene, um, for decades now. But when you travel outside of North America, especially into parts of Europe, it's not the hegemon it is there. And clearly, when you travel into Asia, with our own example of the fact that we're going to be playing Sword World on the Cloister of Dice,
mhm.
our actual play series, it's known, but it's not any bigger than anything else there. Um, the the people here are part of them are a victim of the name recognition, like it's the only name they hear everywhere, so to them it's the only RPG. And then some of them are stuck, and again, the security blanket issue, that's all they cling to. I know that for ages I have tried to get some friends of mine to play other games that can execute the fantasy worlds. A friend of mine, he's built an entire fantasy world. He has a cosmology for it. He's actually made a map for it. He's got a history for it. He's got how cultures interact in it, and he puts it all through D&D. I'm like, bro, there are so many other high fantasy games that could do more with this, especially since you have actual uh, advanced alien civilization parts to your culture here. There are other games that could execute this so much better. And he doesn't want to, and I've I've stopped trying to convince him because he doesn't want to.
And I know some people will say, well, you can do it. You can run any kind of fantasy, just house rule it. one of my big philosophies is house ruling should be a spice, not the main dish. When I would run rifts, I had to do a lot of house ruling to the point where I'm not house ruling anymore. I'm becoming a designer. And that's the exact kind of thing people give Bethesda all the crap in the universe about how in order to make their games playable, you have to install a bunch of mods onto it. And if people are going to give, I don't think it's consistent to give Bethesda all the shade in the universe, which they rightly deserve for that kind of thing, but give that kind of thing a pass in D&D. When I'm seeing so many people house ruling things in the rules that they find to be a problem, even if I agree or disagree, that's beyond the point. The fact that so many people are trying to fix this thing in itself demonstrates an issue.
And what sorts of reasons have your friends or acquaintances given you when you tell them, hey, you have this other role playing game that does exactly what you want, but better than Dungeons and Dragons? What are the excuses, so to speak?
I have heard every excuse under the sun, and I have balked at every single one of them. Sometimes it's, oh, I don't want to learn a new system. But you learned that one. What's the problem? What's the problem with starting fresh? Or this is the only game that everybody I know plays. Well, find a new group. I don't know anybody who's going to play that kind of game. There's whole sites, subreddits, and the like that are dedicated to just finding people for this kind of thing. Oh, no, nobody wants to GM. You do paid GM stuff, as I recall us talking about that, Abraham. Like, Zan and I, one thing that we very much share in common is a strong disdain towards using excuses as a form of security blanket. There is no excuse to not try.
And the excuses I get because unlike Monk's, one of the things I don't actually get to have under my belt as much as Monk does is having a friendly local game store that I could make groups at. Our LGS was purely a card and hobby shop. We at one point in my town we had 3 hobby shops, and one of them did do tabletop gameplay days on like Wednesdays and Fridays. The problem was my house was 10 miles outside of the town, and I didn't own a car, couldn't drive a car. It's, depending on how old I was at the time. And then the one card and hobby shop that still exists in the town is the one card and hobby shop that pushed out all the others by spreading rumors about them, undercutting prices just a long enough time to get them to lose their profit margins. And nobody likes that hobby shop that I know from my hometown. They don't like going there because the owner is a scumbag. But now there's no choice. Beyond that, though, when I would try and play with friends at school, or when I would try and play with, like I said, my friend that I still talk to this day, he and I are still good friends. The most common excuse is, I just don't have any interest. That I got. That was the most common thing. I'm just not interested. I'm like, but why not? I listened to you complain about how you have to change some of these rules so that you can have this type of fantasy in your adventure, when you could just use this system right here and not need to make any changes. I'm like, I'm just not interested. And at that point, I just realized it was ingrained. They don't care. And it was at that point that I was like, okay, well, I don't want to play D&D anymore. So if you guys ever want to play a game with me, I would be more than happy to GM a game of anything else. No one ever took me up on the offer.
And there's an analogy I like to use about a dog sitting on a nail. This old story of a dog howling in pain because he's sitting on an exposed nail on the porch of some house, and everybody else is like, why don't you move? And He keeps howling about how painful it is to sit there, but he won't move.
Mhm.
And everybody starts making the joke he's howling because it's not painful enough.
In my case, I think it's the excuses that I have heard have to do with popularity. When I started to get people into other RPGs, sometimes they said, "But that game isn't popular. If it's a good game, it should be more popular."
Which is a logical fallacy if I've ever heard one.
It's argumentum ad populum by name.
Plus, whenever it comes to that kind of thing, something I've said is, okay, let's apply that to video games. If we're going to be using that argument, then nobody should be playing anything other than Fortnite and Madden
and FIFA.
Mm-hmm.
The three most popular quote unquote games.
Yeah. And some may say, oh, that's a completely different medium. If you're willing to give a pass in one form but not in another, when at the end of the day you're still talking about games, that is hypocrisy.
Yes, I actually told them you have to take into account the marketing, the power of the brand, so it doesn't make sense.
Well, if I was to take that approach as a lover of music, I wouldn't be listening to anything but pop songs.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of listening to nothing but pop songs, no. Especially since I can't hear auto-tune without feeling my blood boil.
I mean, I can hear some auto-tune that's used artistically. I will say this. T-Pain's auto-tune was used artistically, and I think he got too much shit over it. But he did open the floodgates for everyone who is not as skilled as him to jump into that.
I give him a pass because he never took himself seriously.
Yeah, and if you've ever heard him without auto-tune, he has a great voice. But my like the big thing is, until the media boom where they started commodifying nerds, and what I mean by that is they made nerds marketable. Specifically things like I think the big one is the Big Bang Theory TV show, which I hate that show. They say everything to say nothing. All the witty remarks and jokes are surface level science at best and sheer misunderstanding at worst. And it made it quote unquote cool to be a nerd, except the people who were like, oh, I'm nerdy now, they weren't really nerdy. They took on surface level identifiers as being a nerd and said that's being a nerd. I'm like, no, you've never been that person with the passion who grabs this thing you love so much and runs with it. You want to be a nerd, you have to become, in some ways, a little mad about things. You have to be a little insane about the things you love if you're going to be a nerd. And with that commodification, obviously the niche that was TTRPGs started opening up in North America. A lot of people got involved, but casual consumers of any medium, any entertainment, and any genre gravitate towards the thing they recognize most. When it comes to movies, that's things like, in recent years, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. When it comes to TV shows, again, the Big Bang Theory was the perfect example. When it comes to anime, I know that for the longest time, Dragon Ball Z got shit as the casuals anime, even though Dragon Ball Z is amazing and anyone can fight me. But when it comes to tabletop RPGs, the biggest name in North America at the time, and because of that broadening of the niche, now the biggest name for even longer, Dungeons and Dragons. And I don't begrudge Dungeons and Dragons that. Dungeons and Dragons opened up the TTRPG world to hundreds of thousands of people. I love that. That they got involved in TTRPGs at all is a good thing. Yeah. I want these people to explore more. But a lot of the casual consumers don't have that interest.
And for me, the casuals are not my focus. My focus has been being critical of the people who are the dogs sitting on nails, the people who are critical of various rules but are still using that system even though they've house ruled it to hell. Or the people who keep insisting that this one game is the only game that I need. I have when I do my reviews, I do the attitude of a tailor. I don't really do a out of 10 score, even though I did in my early days. It is more about who I would recommend a given work to. And I do feel that there is a game out there for everyone. I don't need to force people into just using 5e with a bunch of extensions. Because if somebody, let's say somebody got into fantasy through I don't know, Harry Potter or something. The type of fantasy that D&D is going to do is not something that they're going to be able to connect with. I would rather give them something like Broomsticks, which is going to be more in that ballpark.
Even though, as always, there are books that can turn Dungeons and Dragons into a Harry Potter experience. About a year ago, I actually reviewed this book for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. It was RPG Academy. I forgot the title, but it's actually pretty decent for what it does. But yeah, I imagine those people looking for those sorts of source books.
And is it possible that you could just grab a bunch of source books and turn it into that? Yes, but I'd rather give people something that would give them that fantasy in the least amount of extra steps.
A couple of things. We first have one of the maxims in the temple is get anyone who wants to play playing with the system that suits them best.
Mm-hmm.
I've phrased it in multiple different ways. That's just one of the many. It's essentially anyone who wants to play, who isn't just, someone who wants to come in and change the hobby. Those people are bad actors, and we rightfully keep them out. Anyone who legitimately wants to play, and they give us an idea of the type of fantasy or the type of experience they're looking for, we want to be able to point them to a system that best emulates that experience. A system like Dungeons and Dragons, which is a very Western high fantasy pastiche type of game, that's it. That's what it tends to encompass. Can encompass a very specific part of the Western high fantasy pastiche, specifically the one that we call the Tolkien melting pot,
mm-hmm.
which is not a bash on Tolkien. It's just the elves, dwarves, all that fun stuff type fantasy. But there are plenty of other types of high fantasy within the Western high fantasy world that aren't encompassed by that there are better games for. Could you make Dungeons and Dragons emulate them with some modifications? Sure. But why take something that's not purpose made and try and shove it in there, like Monk said earlier, square peg in a round hole, and instead take something purpose made so that there's no ambiguity, that you have the experience you want to have right there, one place, no need to fiddle around. You just learn the rules and play the game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we harp on constantly about people playing other systems rather than just trying to, create half a system out of homebrewed rules to emulate what they want.
Mm-hmm.
Now I remember the title. It was 5e Academy Adventures. But now that you touch that point, what would you guys say are the essential parts to create a tabletop RPG that seeks to represent the video game style, or rather the sorts of situations, mechanics that you would expect to see in a video game?
Do you have any idea how little that narrows it down?
So video game, much like anime or tabletop RPG is not a genre, it's an entire medium. Within video games, there are numerous genres. What type of game do you want to emulate? Fighting games? There are tabletops that do that. Are other RPGs? Tabletops that do that. Action adventure games? There are tabletops that do that. You need to first determine what game you're trying to emulate, because that's the big one. The game you're trying to design is going to be entirely dependent on the video game genre or the specific video game you really want to emulate. And so you have to grab that. Then you have to do the research. Monk and I are living examples of this. 2.5 years of work and research into a bunch of Final Fantasy stuff to make our game. But you have to put in the research. You have to really understand the video game you want to create.
That's
Then,
a really good way of narrowing down. Sorry if I interrupt you. Final Fantasy, let's go with that one, because Final Fantasy took a lot of inspiration from Dungeons and Dragons and ended up being something significantly different. If you can elaborate on that point, please go ahead.
Okay. So Final Fantasy indirectly took a lot of inspiration from Dungeons and Dragons, because it first took inspiration from Ultima and Wizardry, which via the path of Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest took examples from Ultima and Wizardry, made its own gameplay loop that Monk and I have identified as town, field, dungeon. You go to a town to stock up on items, you prepare yourself for the adventure ahead, you go through the field fighting monsters along the way, getting gradually stronger, getting some new skills, getting some different resources from monster drops. You go into the dungeon to face the really big confrontation. It's the test of your skills that you've built up so far, and you beat the boss. Then you come out of the dungeon and go to the next town to start the loop again. A lot of early RPGs exhibit this, primarily due to, at the time, hardware limitations. The hardware limited exactly all the width and breadth you could do with an RPG. So on a video game console, they had to limit it to a specific gameplay loop they knew would work, which is why instead of calling these games JRPGs, both Monk and I hate that term because it wasn't organically created, we call them console-style RPGs, because these RPGs arose from the limitations of the consoles at the time. Whereas you have the PC-style RPGs like Ultima, like Wizardry, that were a little bit wider because the PC was a little more powerful then. PC's a lot more powerful now. So you take that idea of Final Fantasy, you take the themes from it, the specific commonalities, and this is actually something we did with Final Fantasy Legend Edition. We didn't want to emulate just one game in the series. Some people do, and that's cool. We wanted to emulate the soul of the series itself.
A question: the main series, or even like Final Fantasy Tactics and all of those?
All of them. Every Final Fantasy, even the spin-off games, even the games like Chocobo's Mystery Dungeon, even the mobile games like Record Keeper Omnia Opera, even games that are inspired by Final Fantasy like Bravely Default. We went into all of these and we captured the mythos. And I can actually, because I still have it open because I constantly keep chapter 1 open for some reason. I don't know. There's a brief section here about the first pillar of our game, mythos, not setting. We make a joke about how people ask, which game are we basing it on? And the answer is yes. And some of the concepts that are always repeating throughout the games, because none of the games are technically in a shared universe. Each game is self-contained, barring the direct sequels like the 13 series or 10-2. But themes like the crystals, the way magic as a mythos is expressed, fire, Fyra, Fyraga, etc. Ships and airships, a character named Sid, the names of summons, Ifrit, Shiva, Odin, Bahamut, etc. The way jobs or archetypes within the games play, because there are archetypes within the games for certain character types that play a specific way, recurring monsters, things of these nature.
The
And
ultimate weapon.
the ultimate weapon, that is definitely one of the monsters that we have as one of our example NPC creations, because we have a NPC creation engine.
Yeah.
We wanted to capture the commonalities that make Final Fantasy, and we didn't want to limit it to any one game. And so that's what we did. We researched and boiled it down and, pun not intended, crystallized it into what it is now. And so with Final Fantasy, especially with Final Fantasy is a video game series that iterates and changes every game. It experiments and plays with what it has and creates new stuff and tosses out stuff that doesn't work, and it's never the same twice.
This was a problem that I had with certain games that were adapting IP, where, and to use as an example, I'll bring up Avatar Legends, which I was very harsh on. With Avatar Legends, I had to ask the question, are you trying to adapt the TV show, or are you trying to adapt the world the TV show takes place in? You should be trying to aim for the latter. Nobody who's picking up Marvel Face Rip, for instance, wants to play as one of the X-Men. They want to play in the Xavier Institute as a new student or something like that.
As their own original mutant or original hero.
I've actually met people that, I want to play as Cyclops. I want to play as Wolverine.
Well, it's a generality. He's trying to say that the vast majority of people who are playing Marvel Phase Rip they have ideas for cool things they could do if only they wrote the comics, and now, well, you can write your own comic book character and play them.
Yeah. I had this same problem as well with the Power Rangers RPG, and that one actually pissed me off because they make a big deal about how you could use it to run any Power Rangers campaign, but so much of the design not only skews towards the Zordon era, but skews towards Season 1 of Mighty Morphin.
Season 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm. And the problem is that is one avenue of so many, given how long that series has gone for, and you bring Super Sentai into the mix, which has been around since the 1970s, and it gets even worse.
There are at this time there are officially 25 seasons of Power Rangers.
Mm-hmm.
So, focusing on just the first and second season of Mighty Morphin is literally 8% of the entirety.
And do you think there was some sort of plan behind it, like, let's start with this that is just season 1 and 2, and later on we can sell the other books that contain details about the other seasons?
There might have been. I can't know for sure.
That could be a strategy that they employed.
I get the feeling that that was an idea that Hasbro had, or rather somebody who didn't know any better within Hasbro, because there was a story that was relayed to me of someone who was trying to pitch a game regarding that would be themed around Uncharted, and the Sony representative insisted that people who are picking this up would want to play as Nathan Drake.
And if they wanted to play as Nathan Drake, well, they can play the Uncharted video games.
And to further demonstrate this, consider TSR Indiana Jones. It didn't have any character creation because it assumed you'd want to play as the cast from the movies. It got roasted over an open flame for this.
I think, back to the people that I have mentioned, I think it's when those people like the characters, but they think they could have portrayed or represented the situation better. In the case of the Uncharted, maybe they want to describe or apply the traits from Nathan in different ways, in various ways that you simply cannot do in the video game.
No, that wasn't how things were relayed to me.
Mhm.
It
I
was
I I think
No,
with that, there may be players who might want to do that, or even some GMs that might want to do that. But they also tend to do that already through character creation and playing the game, even if it's not with the named protagonist of said IP. Somebody's going to make an XP. It happens. Everybody,
someone's going to make an XP, but you shouldn't assume that people are going to be playing as that XP.
yeah. Not everybody is going to play that. In fact, not even the majority. There may still be people who want to play, like you said, Cyclops, Wolverine, but they're not the larger audience. They're a smaller part of the audience.
Hmm.
do you know how successful? Because I don't know how successful the newest Marvel role playing game is. Because they basically pushed that. They had so many stats for all of the heroes, and I think that would be a good
Marvel
way to measure.
Multiverse. I barely hear much in the discourse, and if I'm barely hearing a lot on it, then that is very telling. Um, what didn't exactly help matters is how they tried to sell the thing, because it is more expensive to buy the physical version than it is to buy the digital version, because you cannot get the digital PDF on its own. It comes with a bunch of Roll20 assets as a package deal.
I think you meant to say that the other way around, Monk, that it's more expensive to buy the digital
The
version than the
digital
physical
version.
version.
Yeah, yeah, my bad.
Mhm.
Which the fact that there isn't a way to purchase just the core book, none of the VTT assets or anything like that, was a very, very poor move. The other thing is their attempt at doing that 616 system is not very intuitive.
And there are a lot of limitations when it comes to the lore and the reality within the fiction, so to speak, that they nerf a lot of the powers of the heroes. Captain
Mm,
America can barely bounce his shield off of the enemies and walls. When it comes to the supernova attack from the Fantastic Four, from the Human Torch, it's quite nerfed as well.
some of that is going to be a natural consequence of trying to put some sort of codified system to things that originally didn't have that. So that kind of thing is inevitable with most superhero games. So I'm not going to single one game out for that. I'm far more likely to single out like I said, the 616 die system is not very intuitive because you're supposed to roll high except for this one die, and that's just not going to come as naturally to people. There's also the fact that there is a degree of analysis. They didn't do an adequate job of addressing the analysis paralysis issue, which is going to happen in universalist and superhero games no matter what, but you can take steps to soften the blow. You know, make the lethal shot less lethal. It's still going to hurt, but it's not going to kill you.
Yeah. Um, the analysis paralysis problem arises with universalist and superhero games because of all the choices you have, just the sheer breadth and width of things you have to get through.
Mhm.
and uh, I think Phase Rip did a pretty good job with at least trying to reduce it.
Phase Rip eventually did because there's been years of experience with the matter, plus the original core book for Phase Rip didn't have character creation. The advanced one did.
Hmm.
Uh, there's also the fact that there's been a ton of support over the years, and the fact that some people make jokes about how complex looking.
Oh, your microphone went out there, Monk. Um, this sometimes happens when his signal decides to be a dick about things. Um,
I actually really like the face rip cyclopedia. I purchased it a while ago when it was on sale, and I love it because it has so much material.
yeah.
Mhm.
I think he messaged me real quick. I don't know. I will actually message him real quick.
Mm.
Books and dealing with old navigation of those books.
There we go.
There we go. Yep. Monk, your mic went out for like the last 10-ish seconds.
Mhm.
Damn.
Yeah, it's all good. Abraham actually just brought up how he really likes the face rip encyclopedia.
Encyclopedia.
Yeah. And there's plenty of material on sites like Classic Marvel Forever, but but for me, if I have to use one example of a Supers game that really went out of its way to lessen the blow when it came to that analysis paralysis, I would actually bring up Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition. The reason for that is yes, there's the package preset characters in the core book, but a little further on in the core book, there's a kind of choose your own adventure segmented version of those packages that you can take as an alternative. It's still in the same theme of those packages, just slight shifts to the left or to the right with parts of them.
Mm.
Which makes things a little easier, since there is a part of the experience that's unsupported, and that is people who are in that middle zone between people who have never played a game before and people who are veterans. And this is the reason I'm always in favor of crunch medium games.
Now that we are exploring that about superheroes, do you think there is any difference at all when you maybe you are planning to design a tabletop RPG with the theme of superheroes, but there could also be the possibility to design a tabletop RPG in the way that video games handle superheroes? Is there any difference according to your understanding, research, etc.?
I think the majority of games that are built around superheroes, are built around something more specific. In the case of video games, it ultimately depends on what super you're dealing with, or what sort of gameplay style you're trying to encourage. Like the Arkham games and Freedom Force are both supers games, and that's the only thing that they have in common. In the same vein, I have noticed a shift from attempting to do settings with supers RPGs, and to more focus on certain angles. Even though I was very critical of Avatar Legends, I do appreciate Masks: A New Generation, because that game, it is a superhero game, but it's more focused on the young superhero archetype. Things like Teen Titans, Young Justice, the X-Men, sometimes spin-offs like Generation X, obviously Young Avengers, Great Lakes Avengers, that kind of thing. It's aiming in that direction. Hit the Streets, Defend the Block is very much skewed towards street level superheroes. And even some of the games that are trying to do the kitchen sink approach are operating on something of a tier scale, where there's a defined line between your street level hero and your cosmic level hero, for instance, and how to build around those angles.
I think when it comes to video game superhero games, you have two very broad categories. You have a play the comics set of games. Some games like the recent Midnight Suns game that came out is one of those, because you're actually playing as the heroes, the recognizable comic heroes. But on the other hand, you have the playing in the universe of the comics, and the best and technically worst example after a certain company bought them out that I can use is DC Universe Online. It was a very large DC MMO where you got recognizable power sets that emulated some of the powers you may have seen in the comics, but you weren't playing any of the heroes. You were playing alongside them. You had mentors on each, both villain and hero side, that represented one of the three broad categories of heroes. Metahumans were led for the hero side. Metahumans were led by Superman. Tech heroes were led by Batman. Magic heroes were led by Wonder Woman, because most of her stuff is based off of Greek magic. And of course, over on the villain side, you had Lex Luthor, and then you had Circe, which is part of Wonder Woman's Rogues Gallery, and she's the goddess of magic, technically. And then I think I don't remember who they put in charge of the tech heroes or the tech villains. I don't think it was the Joker. But you were actually a hero or a villain that got your powers and was recruited up, and now you're doing these missions helping out either the Justice League or League of Evil. And I found that much more compelling because I'm now a character in my own comic book story rather than being a character in an established comic book story.
That kind of thing is also why I think people had, before the illusion got shattered, people had such an attachment to their version of Shepard in Mass Effect. And in the same vein, why when the attempt was done to try and do that in Andromeda, it didn't stick. But when it comes, a lot of people seem to have this idea that there's this great wall of China between designing in tabletop and designing in video games. But let's not forget that a lot of people who are designing video games are giant ass nerds.
And sometimes they are great recognizable names, like well, as much as I really don't like him that much, but Sandy Peterson, Call of Cthulhu, Doom.
It is an abstract kind of hell. And don't worry, everybody gives Peterson's maps shit in Doom. But a lot of the monster designs in Doom were referencing monsters from D&D, even if they eventually changed into things that are more legally distinct.
Caco Demon.
Yep.
Everybody brings up the Caco Demon.
Yeah. Mostly because I can't bring up Lost Souls without getting angry, or Pain Elementals without getting angry. But there's...
I'm going to bring up something else that's going to make you angry.
What?
The Archvile.
Yeah. Yeah, that'll work.
Yeah. The Archvile. Yeah, I forgot about that.
I'd actually say that on the scale of bastards, the Archvile isn't the worst offender. No, the worst offender are those damn chain gunners.
The Mancubus, right?
No, the chain Mancubus are not
the missiles. No, I was confusing them. Mm-hmm.
No, because
the chain gunners are basically just infantry, like the normal possessed Marines, except
zombies with the chain gun. I was
and they're everywhere in in some of the hardest Doom side games. Would you consider Plutonia a side game, Monk?
I'd consider it an add-on.
Okay. So Doom add-on then. Proper terminology.
Since Plutonia was one of 2 episodes that was added onto Final Doom, and is the more memorable because the other one's TNT Evolution, which puts me to sleep. I'm not going to say it's too easy. It's just a case of bigger is not always better. But this idea, I remember, and I when it comes to this whole division between the two, I remember people getting really pissy about the Book of Nine Swords back in the 2000s, and I had said back then that you're going to have a whole bunch of people who didn't grow up with the approved fantasy, and some of those people were going to make games based on what inspired them, and that's just something you're going to have to deal with.
I actually thought of something that I think could be a possible way of designing a tabletop RPG that takes direct inspiration from a video game superhero setting or game, rather. For example, Beautiful Joe. In Beautiful Joe, you have the slow-mo and the fast-forward mechanism within the game that you can dodge bullets like Matrix, or you can move really fast. If you were to design a video game superhero style of tabletop RPG, that would have to be applied as a sort of universal superpower for all of the heroes, that they, no matter your superpower, even if you turn your skin to stone, or if you have you should raise out of your eyes or whatever, all of the player characters will be able to perhaps through some sort of meta currency activate the slow-mo or the fast forward sort of mechanic.
That's a start, but I don't think that's enough. If someone were to ask me what I would do as far as designing a supers game, I'd say the first thing is, and this is something we did, establish pillars. It's that nail down to a T what you're trying to do.
No matter what game you're designing, that's the first. We have people who come into the monastery Discord asking for help on, well, I'm thinking of designing a game. And they'll start going into details about like what dice rolling engines they want to use, or what some of the inspirations are. And we usually have to go, hold on, slow down, back up a second. What is the core concept of your game? What experience are you trying to give people? I know that the most recent one that we gave some advice on, they talked about trying to create a rules light game with some fantasy elements, and mentioned some video games they were inspired by. And then I said, okay, hold on. What's your core concept? From some of the things that I've been looking at, what you've said, and what I can make connections of about that, it sounds like you want quick, snappy, but easy to get into combat, and a robust dungeon exploration system. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, those are pieces, but you need to have a core concept for those pieces to snap into. What is the core experience you are trying to give people? Once you have that core experience, you can start weaving everything else in and making sure that what you have fits your core experience, because you need to have that concept for everything else to revolve around. It's the axle of your wheel.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of your Final Fantasy project, what would you say is the core?
We have a set of pillars that we establish in the first chapter.
Yeah,
that goes into that.
The three pillars, I've already described one of them, how we wanted to capture the soul of what is Final Fantasy without settling on one game. We call that one mythos, not setting. The second pillar is customization is king. We wanted the game to be as customizable as it possibly could be, so that people could make basically whatever Final Fantasy vision
character
they
concept.
had.
Oh, okay.
Not just character concepts. We have customization for characters, class, and jobs. Yeah. We also have customization for weapons and armor. We have customization for NPCs. We have different setting rule sets that are optional that you can use, because we are going, even though everyone's going to have their own favorite Final Fantasy. So we did include some systems from other Final Fantasies as alternative rule sets if you want to use them. And it's all there to allow somebody to build cool characters, and also allow a GM to build a cool scenario. And the third pillar is a 4-act structure to how the game will generally play. And we built that based again off of the Townfield Dungeon idea from original console style RPGs. Ours is preparation, exploration, encounter, and downtime. And preparation, you're at your base or you're at town or you're someplace that is a little safer than most, preparing for going out on some sort of adventure. What that adventure may be, it could be a heist, could be spelunking in a cave, could be going to fight the Empire. It isn't necessarily anything you have to say is concretely, oh, I took this quest, let's go on an adventure. With exploration, that this would basically be the field part of Townfield Dungeon, where you're out there, you're having your random battles, or you're having your chases and your interrogations, and you're doing all these things to work towards the culmination of your adventure. Encounter sounds like we mean a combat encounter, but encounter is supposed to be the climax. It's where everything you've been doing comes together, and as it all comes together, you either you confront a boss, or you get into it with a main antagonist and have a scene with them, and everything you resolve a lot of loose threads that you had, but you may open more questions. And then downtime is you get you learn more about the consequences of your in total of your adventure. You tally up your loot, and you look towards maybe any improvements you've gotten over the time, and do some tinkering here and there, and then prepare for the next adventure. Going back into the preparation
the
phase.
next adventure being the next session, or is that some loop that happens 2 or 3 times during a single session?
That'll depend from table to table.
Okay.
Mhm.
It could be that you have a big, maybe that 4-act structure is just one big session, or you could have it 2 or 3 times depending on how you've laid out your own campaign.
Because
this
I
is
was
built
sorry,
this is
go
built
ahead.
around a concept that is used in a lot of Asian literature called Quiche Show Tenketsu. It is a 4-act structure. Introduction, development, twist, conclusion.
Because I was thinking of Come Victor Drive, because of the same structure that, this is the investigation phase, and now you have the big fight with the big bad or the evil army or whatever, and then you have like you would say the downtime section, and that's like the mark of the end of the session. But rather you are handling depending on the table, right? Because some tables perhaps want to have several adventures in a single session.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's no the 4-act structure is there to give a framework for you to have a logical progression in your sessions. Whether you use that framework for a single big session, or whether you use that framework for multiple parts in a single session, is up to you. We do not limit the GM and their players into one or the other.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking that perhaps it's also quite challenging that when someone wants to design an anime-style tabletop RPG, a lot of people seem to think that they fall into the trap of being a universal system or a superhero system that is, apart from the anime art that they use in the core book, it's almost the same system that you would use to build a superhero, or one of those point-buy systems for any other sort of theme. What do you
That
think
was a
about that?
problem. That was a problem in the early days. It is significantly less of a problem now. I have seen significantly less quote unquote anime RPGs. What I have seen instead over the last 20 years has been a shift towards developing around this particular genre, subgenre, or a particular series. Battle Century G, for instance, is very much carrying the DNA of Super Robot Wars, and it is laser focused on that. Knights of the Round Academy is built around its own particular mix of school drama and mechs. Bounty Head Bebop is very much leaning towards that space western that was pioneered by Outlaw Star and Cowboy Bebop back in the day. The and this is where we go into that key of why it's important to nail down what in that particular approach you're trying to do. I've been reading through Heartbeats in Perfect Sync, which is very much trying to emulate The World Ends with You.
You forgot about good friends of the monastery, Derek and Kira's Maginites Awakening, which
Yes.
is absolutely 100% invoking Maho Shoujo and Super Sentai, and how those kids are normally living in some sort of academy or university or school, in a lot of the Americanized versions of those shows.
And speaking of another friend of ours, let me talk about Lone Wolf Fist for a second.
Which
By
is
our good
entirely
brother
north
Joel.
of us. Yep,
It
Fist of the North Star.
Yeah, it is nakedly trying to emulate Fist of the North Star. Games like Disc Masters is very much trying to emulate Monster Rancher.
There's a name that's a deep cut for a lot of people.
Blades of Ether, which is available on itch.io, that is trying to emulate Xenoblade Chronicles, specifically Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and 3. And there was a card-based affair that I covered a couple years ago called Shonen Final Burst, which wasn't trying to be an anime TTRPG. It was specifically building around shonen fighting manga. You brought up JoJo, and Overarms is blatantly trying to emulate JoJo, and to a lesser extent, Persona.
I was just thinking, do you know if they have released or are planning a tabletop RPG that seeks to represent Yu-Gi-Oh or similar card games?
Yes.
Yes.
2 of them.
Oh, please say their names.
So one of them is by a good friend of ours, Vincent of Vindicate Entertainment, which is Banishment, and that one is attempting to emulate the world that Yu-Gi-Oh presents within the cards and some of the stories that are hidden within several cards, like for instance the story of Gearfried. And another one which is currently in development.
By level 99.
Huh?
You're going to talk about the one by level 99?
That was a board game, so that's a different affair.
That's true.
What I am going to talk about instead, though, is Perfect Draw, which is a game that is currently in development. It is using Powered by the Apocalypse as its system, and it is one giant tribute to card battle anime, Yu-Gi-Oh being obviously the biggest case of that, but someone could take what's present here and use it to do their own version of Card Fight Vanguard or Kaijudo, or even Chaotic if they so chose. I'm pretty sure somebody who's creative enough could use this to replicate Bakugan if they wanted to. The point, so it is very much there. And he brought up Level 99, who they've dipped into role-playing games, but they're mostly a board game development studio. They did a board game called Millennium Blades, which was trying to replicate the experience of the Yu-Gi-Oh anime. You're playing people who are playing this in-universe card game, which I remember when I showed that and some of the other stuff that Level 99 has done to you, Zen, and you had a brain pause moment.
Mm-hmm.
But just for instance, when it comes to the specificity, there have been plenty of fan games that are drawing upon Digimon, but there is one that I've covered in the past called Shatterkin, which is drawing upon Digimon, but more specifically drawing upon Tamers. And we've had our fair share of people who asked us how to do a TTRPG, a Tokusatsu themed TTRPG, and we end up telling them that is way too wide of a net. You need to narrow it down to either one series or one angle within that series. You brought up Convictor Drive. A lot of people have been looking at Convictor Drive and saying that this is Kamen Rider the TTRPG. That is only partially true. It is it is certainly doing the transforming hero archetype, but it is leaning more into the science fiction end of things. There's also the fact that the creator cited Hiroaka and Iron Man as major inspirations, and the primary the writers that I'd say are closer to Convictor Drive would be the tech-based ones like Fives or Drive, as well as to a certain extent the Metal Hero trilogy from the early days. You know, Gavan, Charivan, and the like. And of course, I'm bringing that up because that allows me to invoke the Japanese Chuck Norris, known as Kenji Oba. Kenji Oba standing on a landmine once. The landmine apologized. Uh, but it's important to nail down that specificity. He mentioned Magi Knights earlier. That's not trying to replicate all of Super Sentai, but or all of Maho Shoujo, but this mix between the two that also has elements of Persona 3 and Puella Magi Madoka Magica into its specific setting.
And still powered by Dungeons and Dragons.
Barely. The early version of it was actually using Genesis, but you cannot bring a Magi Knight and put them into a D&D campaign. It's not going to work, and vice versa. It is using the D20 system, but that's where it kind of begins and ends. That's like saying because Fantasy Craft and 13th Age both use a D20 system that you can bring characters from one to the other. You can't.
I was going to say, don't give them ideas.
They already made a Magi Knight class that they put out for free for those who want to use it in D&D, but I haven't seen that many people do that. And Sam Cusack is recently put out a game called 3 Minutes, which is his tribute to the Ultra series.
Mm-hmm.
But more specifically, he's leaning towards the Ultra series in the Showa era. And it's for this reason that I said that the easiest tokusatsu to adapt into TTRPG form would be either Ultraman or Garo, because of the fact you only have to deal with one genre of storytelling. Ultraman, throughout all of the craziness that's happened since the 60s, is still a science fiction story. A very pulpy science fiction story, which I have to remind people the original Ultra Q was the Japanese Twilight Zone, essentially. So going pulpy is nothing new. Plus, when people say it's too pulpy, I always tell people that it's only that if you view fantasy if you view science fiction as always being the what I call large men with screwdrivers kind of science fiction, which is basically technical people solving a technical problem. That kind of science fiction is in the minority when it comes to the large scope, because we're talking about 200 years of science fiction storytelling. But it's important to nail down that particular thing, and that was why establishing those pillars was important for us, because obviously Final Fantasy goes into a whole host of different directions, and we needed to create a through line, which is why we studied everything to see what we could keep to establish that through line. Now, the fact that there is the recurring job system throughout the years certainly made our work easier because we could use that as a foundation. There's also the fact that there's been a lot of fan-made Final Fantasy RPGs going all the way back to the Returners project back in 1994.
It sounds like you have done a lot of work with that project. If it were me, if I had that passion, I would probably be thinking about selling it as a different IP, like using the Final Fantasy structure, but renaming everything, because it sounds like a really solid structure that you have there.
It's been considered, but I wanted to take this approach because a big factor to helping me branch out what were the free games that that I would see fans make or go on forums like Order of the Stick or the Forge. And doing a project like this is my own way of giving back to that particular group.
Mm.
As for me, the passion I have is specifically for the subject matter as well as the medium of TTRPGs. If we were trying to do something wholly original, I don't think I would have been as committed, simply because of the fact that I I write, or at least I used to, I kind of write still, just every so often, um, and come up with my own creativity that way. But I don't ever foresee any of those becoming a game, because to me those stories are something that happen the way they happen. I don't foresee it making a world deep enough to warrant making a sandbox for other people to play in. That might change later in the years. I don't know. But because I write my own original stuff, it isn't something that I make the sandbox for. But when I have when I see other people's creativity, when I see other people's ideas behind different fictional elements, I feel like I can use their sandboxes easier than if I could use my own stuff. So when I get to play in somebody else's playground essentially and help improve their sandbox or help make a new sandbox or whatever else, that's where my passion really starts to kick in, because I've got someone else's framework that I then get to work within and do a bunch of stuff that I've always wanted to do with it. And so making a TTRPG based on an extant IP, it was really serendipitous. I know if that we had done, I don't know, any other fantasy, if we had done something based in something sci-fi that I'm familiar with, I would have been just as excited. But if we had tried to do something completely original off the bat, I probably would have bowed out. Now that we've got one experience with this, maybe later on down the line we might try other original stuff. I know that Monk has been working on other things in the background, and when he returns to his desk, he'll talk about some of that stuff. But
Yo,
yeah, there he is. Like, speak of the devil.
speak the
But
devil's name, and he shall appear.
indeed. But as it is, um, I'm not sure right now whether I've got the wherewithal to do a completely original TTRPG.
I've I've had my fair share of ideas, and I'm constantly theory crafting in one form or another. However, it's all about getting more practice in. How, because that's the way you get into Carnegie Hall. Practice.
Practice, practice, practice.
And I would certainly be open to it, and there's been plenty of world building concepts that we've explored in episodes of the Geek Watch podcast. Whether it be the time that we tried to build a world using the random element system that's in Mystic Empyrean, which we recently covered, and midway through got invaded by Level 99 Games.
Yep.
Pretty cool.
Uh, which I will note Mystic Empyrean is an interesting beast because it's a good counter to the people who say, oh, you need to have one GM for it to be a TTRPG. No, you don't. Oh, you needed to have dice. You need dice for it to be a TTRPG. No, you don't. Oh, and I will note as an aside, I do not consider card-based TTRPGs to be diceless. The
It's
only
just a
thing
different randomization system.
Mhm.
Well, diceless in the sense that there are no dice. It's more like, yeah, like another
The only
tool.
games I consider diceless are ones where there is absolutely no randomization. Stuff like Xenoscape or Amber.
Yes, but I was referring to the object itself, the die. There are no dice because you don't use dice, but there is randomization.
Yeah, games that a card-based game is never. The games that I have that do use cards don't refer to themselves as diceless, though some people argue it.
I actually refer to them as tool-less systems because there are no tools. Tool-less.
But another big example of settings we've come up with, and some of these concepts were just me presenting like a one sentence idea and seeing where we take it. Zan, I think this is a good time to bring up Agito Arcanum.
Yeah, we've done world building episodes based on different concepts. Agito Arcanum was a world building concept based on the idea of why do so many fantasy settings that we've been seeing in, for example, anime, have adventurers guilds. What does the adventurers guild actually do? And so we came up with the idea that, well, the adventurers guild has to be some sort of regulatory body that determines who is a good adventurer and who isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And this snowballed into, well, if there's a regulatory body, that also means that they have to have a training system, because they're the ones who standardize the training and standardize the ranks and standardize, to regulate, you have to have standards, and to have standards, you have to have an example. So this all it all spiraled into Agito Arcanum, a giant city-sized university for adventurers, essentially. It also has a city around it. So it's a big, like, castle-like structure that is the University Agito Arcanum itself, but because it also has to be self-sufficient, it's surrounded by a castle city and farms, and there's all this stuff just for that alone. But Agito Arcanum has a bunch of experienced adventurers of what we consider the four broad types of adventurers in this particular setting, which is, you've got your physical damage classes, or your physical strength based classes, House Titan. You've got your skill based classes, House Hermes. These are your rogues and such. A lot of them are good con men and face men as well. You've got your House of Divine Magic, which is House Nua, and then finally your House of the Arcane Magics, and that's House Odin. And each of the houses actually has a goal beyond just teaching adventurers to learn how to be adventurers. They also have their own focus on what they want to do for their specific branch of adventuring. For example, House Odin is constantly trying to delve into the deepest secrets of the arcane to understand the underlying underpinning magic of all of the universe, or something along those lines. But the place teaches adventurers to be adventurers, because then the adventurers guild can be sure, or at least the branch guilds that come off of Agito Arcanum can be like, oh yeah, they're Arcanum trained, so they have this rating according to the Arcanum's rating. And this allows other kingdoms and other places to know that the regulatory body that is trusted, Agito Arcanum, vouches for these people to take missions of this level, and that they won't lose, or at least they're very unlikely to lose. Because if someone loses a mission, the surrounding area could be at risk of great harm, especially at the high level, high ranking and high level missions. Oh, we have to go out and slay a dragon brood because otherwise it's going to wipe out 2 kingdoms. If your adventurers can't be trusted to do that, how's anyone supposed to put up a mission for them? So it just spiraled out into the logical extreme of, well, if an adventurers guild is part of a regulatory body, there are all these things that have to interconnect to create it.
That makes me think a bit of a combination of Ravnica with the Goblin Slayer Guild system, more or less.
um, I mean, I can see where you're combining those two, and I think Goblin Slayer was probably on our minds when we were first talking about Agito Arcanum because I think Goblin Slayer season 1 had just finished.
There was that. Also, I was playing Fire Emblem Three Houses around that time,
Yeah.
and I've been very vocal about the fact that that part one of that story was the most interesting, where you are acting as the teacher for that whole class and the
Yep.
decisions you have to make in that, because that's the sort of decisions you end up doing in something like that, or when you're the commander of the keep in Dragon Age Origins Awakening. Those kind of experiences end up being relegated to RTSs or 4X games, which, don't get me wrong, I like my fair share of them, even if some of them can be very dangerous. Looking at you, Civilization.
Nuclear Gandhi
Uh,
says hi.
not even that. Just one more turn and it's dawn. But those are very removed from the on the ground setup, because you're looking at it from a top down perspective. You're looking at it from a god perspective, essentially, and it's a different experience when you're on the ground having to make those kind of decisions and not looking at a bunch of menus.
Yep. Um, but that's just one example of how we've done world building from a single, well, what if X statement we've
Um,
made to each
we've
other.
we've experimented with doing mecha quite a bit, because we are both mech fans, and we keep making fun of Giga for his mecha is dead crack a few years ago.
I am. I will say it now. Giant robots are love. Giant
Mhm.
robots are life.
Have you seen that game, Mechatop, the tabletop system?
Yeah, I
Mhm.
am. Oh, I am aware of it.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's really
there
good.
there was also one fan project that is worth noting, especially given that for some folk, they already have the pieces to run it, and that is Mobile Suit Skirmish,
Heh.
Hmm.
which is specifically it is specifically made with the intent that, if you already have Gundam kits, then half the work is already done.
Oh no! What will I ever do with the 12 fucking models I have built on my desk?
Hmm.
I I am a I am a Gunpla enthusiast. Not just Gundam either. I recently built a Mazinger Zero.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm. It's beautiful. It's so monstrous and magnificent.
I
Uh,
hold on. I can actually get the picture. Give me a second.
mm.
And it specifically is skewing towards 1 by 144 scale. Um, though of course, going bigger for certain, bigger mechs like the Psycho Gundam or the Big Zom. But just going into that whole thing of fans have made very interesting takes that can meet and exceed what is done by official sources. And we there were a couple. I think one of my favorite cases of us building a setting was when I said, "What about doing a mech series that leans heavily into combined arms?" Which spiraled into a whole thing where we have warfare built around these mobile battleships called Titans, which are as much like the helicarrier mixed with the forward operating bases you can get, along with advanced tech to explain why you have mechs and tanks in the same room.
Uh, just for just letting you know, I did post the picture of my current setup of robots
Mhm.
in Discord.
I'll check it
Uh,
out. What I really love about that model is that it can open its mouth and it looks so savage.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, he in that one I have him doing his classic screaming pose, so his mouth is open there.
mhm.
Oh,
Yeah. The but the thing, and I think one of the first attempt we did at world building based on a concept was us trying to create a magic themed shonen.
I think
A
so, yeah.
shonen, and we ended up making this whole thing built around the concept of using the elements of the I Ching as styles of magic.
Yep.
But of course, sometimes we do this sort of world building, and it's not necessarily worlds. It is building games, like build like trying to mix console style RPG with boomer shooter,
That was a good one.
or
Um
the one world building concept that got us in a bit of trouble. Try saying, why does cyberpunk need to be a dystopia?
we built a non-dystopian cyberpunk universe.
mm.
Everybody assumes, or at least everybody that was vocal about it assumes that for cyberpunk to be cyberpunk, you have to have the oppressive regime of either megacorps or totalitarian governments or whatever. There has to be a dystopian world involved. And well, one, saying there has to be is already anti-punk. Punk is about being a bit counterculture in some cases. Um, but the other part of that is, in order to be counter to something, there does need to be a thing you're countering, but it doesn't have to be a dystopia. It has to be. It can be a lot of things. We went with the oppressiveness of just being in a new frontier for humankind, because our cyberpunk world takes place in the last frontier of Earth, the depths of the ocean. And you had to contend with things like the pressure, adapting to new both cybernetic and biological things that allow you to deal with living that far underwater, the constant darkness, the crushing mental taxation that comes with working that deep. That was actually one of the key components to our world having something else you have to fight against, something that would almost cripple people who couldn't fight against it. And it wasn't even just some from on high person going, "You're underneath me." It's this sense of pressure, this sense of crushing depth, this sense of, "Holy shit, am I ever going to get out of here alive?"
Mm-hmm.
And
But
so
we ended up making these cities that are these large self-sufficient cities that are in the middle of the ocean, and there's three layers to these city states.
In the middle of the
There's
ocean, below the water,
You have
or
the surface.
mhm.
You have the twilight, which is the range between just a little bit underwater to the barrier where light can't reach. And then below that, you have what is simply known as the black.
yep, we didn't name it because of Mildred though. The surface of these cities is basically like any port of entry on a country. They're heavily defended. They are used for import, export, and customs type stuff, and they aren't really a place where people live residentially. The residential areas are in the twilight. They're in between the layers, some at higher places where there's more sunlight so that you could do things like grow food, and some that are at lower layers so that you have people that can do things with the special pressure that the ocean allows at certain places. Because there's going to be a lot of weird science happening that far under the ocean, because you can take advantage of some weird physics that we don't get on the surface of Earth. And then in the black, that's where they found, was it that they found a new element, or they just found a cache of a lot of good elements? I forget what we went with there.
We went with a cache of a lot of good elements because we were trying to channel a bit of the the American Gold Rush.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So there are a lot of elements you can't get to because they're 5 miles below sea level. So these people have had to develop cybernetic implants that help with the pressure, or biological changes that help with filtering water in oxygen and such. But you're in the black is a haunting place. I mean, we've seen video from submersibles about what that dark part of the ocean looks like.
And the
Imagine
weird-ass
being
creatures that inhabit it.
exactly. Imagine being there in person. You are a miner on the newest frontier of the world, of Earth. It's still Earth, but it's so alien because it's a part of Earth we can't ever normally get to. And you're mostly alone. You're surrounded by the unfamiliar and the darkness. And so people had to deal with that. And that's where our biggest stumbling block for this new nascent ocean civilization came from.
Let me present to you a disturbing vision based on that.
Okay.
Imagine if in science fiction, the world that we inhabit is actually just a small thing in an endless ocean of darkness. I am mentioning this because here in Mexico we have the mythology when Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca fought Zipactli. Zipactli is a Lovecraftian horror if there ever was one. A being that is half crocodile, half fish, but it is so huge that it could devour the entire world. And it swims through these dark waters. And Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl actually had to fight it so that the earth wouldn't be devoured. But if you think about that mythology, the Lovecraftian monsters make a lot of sense. The Cthulhu or Cthulhu, the Dagon, they all look like crustaceans, octopus or octopi or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it would make sense that they would be able to swim through the ocean of space.
Yeah.
And the wings, the ridiculous wings of Cthulhu. Some people say, oh, that thing cannot fly with those small wings. What if they are not wings and they are more like fins, like to swim?
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And that alien understanding, that the unknown, essentially. I mean, obviously Lovecraftian horror is built entirely on the unknown. And that's part of what we tried to go with as well. Sure, we've had submersibles down there that have videotaped tiny, infinitesimal pieces of this dark zone of the ocean, but never the entirety of it. You can't get the entirety of it. And that's the alien part. You never know what's down there. And so, yeah, when we did non-dystopian cyberpunk, and of course there were plenty of naysayers, and we have laughed at them continuously.
Because a lot of people accused us of creating and this was before we even did the episode. I just put forward the idea in various places, and I would hear some variation of you're creating a world where there's no conflict, or you're creating a utopia. Putting aside the fact that a utopia is the most dystopian of dystopian settings.
I always have to say that a utopia is the highest dystopia because it requires totalitarianism to remain a utopia.
But they were assuming things that I never outright said. The whole idea was building upon something I had talked about in the past, where I feel that a lot of people's interpretation of cyberpunk as a storytelling genre is far too rooted in 80s futurism, or futurism from the lens of the current scene in the 1980s. Like the technology everywhere, right around the time when a lot of technology was becoming more and more affordable. The big megacorps at a time when corporate raiders were an endemic problem in the financial world. And I had thought about all of the different technological advancements that have come in the last 40 years that a lot of cyberpunk isn't considering, or not considering as far as they could.
It
Well,
could also be with the traditionalism of the name, because when you say cyberpunk, the traditional sense is that punks fighting the control of cybernetics. Or if someone says steampunk, uh, punks fighting the control via steam.
Steampunk started
Ma-
as a joke.
or
that's actually true.
magic punk or whatever. Oh, they are fighting the control of these
Yeah,
sorcerers.
except punk is at the end of the day self-expression. And what you're getting at is something that Zan and I have discussed on several shows and gotten ourselves in trouble in several times we've talked about this, and that is one of our maxims: design by gospel.
Well, it's one of our sayings. The maxim is do not fall into design by gospel.
The best way to summarize design by gospel is doing things a certain way because we've always done things a certain way. Why have we done things that certain way? Because it's what we've always because that's how we've done it.
Yeah, it's
And
a circular logic.
Mhm. And what I've used as a warning sign to what happens when you go too far into that design by gospel circular logic is the current state of sim racing video games, where so many of them focus so much on realism that they've lost sense of the proper priorities of being a game. You talked earlier about certain folk who are almost autistically focused on this idea of what role playing is, and in the process forget that they're still playing a game.
Mhm.
It's in that same principle, or this idea of what fantasy is supposed to be. This idea that fantasy is supposed to be this Western European pastiche.
It's essentially what we're criticizing is prescriptive gaming, that there is a prescribed and proper method that things need to take form in.
Mhm.
And that's anathema to creativity, for one. Creativity, sure, you can say, hey, you can create using this method. I mean, that's how most people start, practicing the methods that are present. That's how people get good at art. That's how people get good at writing. That's how people get good at anything creative. They practice what is present. And there's actually a term for it in the visual arts world called masterworks, where you either by sight, you attempt to emulate the art that's already there by sight. You don't trace it, but you do try to emulate it on your whatever your artistic medium is. And that's how most creatives start being creative. They have to cut their teeth somewhere. They have to get an idea of how creativity works somewhere. But that doesn't mean that it always has to be that way. And that's what we fight against, because the people who say, well, it always has to be this way specifically. You always have to make a game using the high fantasy inspirations that Gygax used, which Gygax himself would fight against if he were still here today.
Mhm.
He would outright be like, what are you assholes talking about? Go make your own games. We made these games this way because we liked these authors and these games. Go make your own games using the things you like in the ways you want. That is what Gygax would say.
Mhm.
Although when it comes to the Tolkien elements, he did it a lot to draw more people in. He was actually not he liked some of the fantasy elements that appear in the Tolkien-esque story, but he
well,
did it
remember,
more like a
Gygax is
marketing.
one half of the equation. So
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that's why I said
Yeah.
why I said we instead of I.
Mhm.
Yeah, obviously you add things to appeal to people. That's part of marketing. But when you're being creative, whatever you're being, as Monk said, punk is supposed to be self-expression, and it's supposed to be self-expression that is counter to the popular thing. At least that's what punk was probably originally made for, to be. If you look at the original punk movement, it was self-expression that didn't follow what was popular. You just did what you wanted to. And sure, that
In your setting, in your particular setting, what would be the thing that the punks are expressing themselves against?
The common sense of the rest of the world. You can't build a civilization underwater. That'll never
Ah,
work.
yeah. Hmm.
You'll never be able to sustain yourself. And
Hmm.
they're also fighting their own limits. We're just humans, but we can use technology and biology to make ourselves better than we were. The people who focus on there has to be a dystopia for conflict in anything cyberpunk or in anything punk in general, they only view conflict as man versus authority. And this is talking about classic literature, um, conflicts, man versus nature, man versus self, man versus gods, etc. What we invoked, the conflict doesn't have to be man versus man. It's man versus self, man versus nature. It's a different type of conflict, but it's still there.
It sounds like it's for it to be easier for them for them to understand the concept better. They could be thinking of they should think of cybernetic punks rather, like punks that take advantage of cybernetics, perhaps.
That's one way they could probably take it, but the big thing here is that even then, not everybody who's underwater has cybernetics. Some of them do.
Okay.
Some of them
Mhm.
have been there long enough to have kids who have biological changes because of being raised in that environment. It it's a society that's been around long enough to build multiple cities under the ocean and mine these deep sea resources and trade with the rest of the world for other things they need using these resources.
Would you say that the cybernetic aspect is a major element of all of the cities, or just like
I
in different proportions?
the cybernetic aspect um, is primarily the fact that there is futuristic technology used to create a setting these people can live in. So yes, the cities do have a lot of the cyber portion of cyberpunk. They have the futuristic technology that keeps the pressure from killing people, the futuristic technology that gives everybody air to breathe, the futuristic technology that helps them grow better crops, the things that they need to survive. But that's not the only thing down there, because the other part of cyberpunk when it was first really rising was the question of transhumanism and the singularity. That was a big thing in the 80s where
Mhm.
people were asking, what does it mean to be human, and are you still human if you've replaced everything of yourself with a machine? um that's a Nobody ever consider. I feel like people have stopped considering that question with cyberpunk in recent days. Would you agree, Monk?
I would, and this goes into the issue with that whole gospel thing is you're 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 creating a culture of conformity where you're not allowing people to even question um, what is present, and in doing so, you end up creating stagnation. Again, this is why I brought up the state of sim racing, because that genre is very much suffering from stagnation when it comes to the high production and even the mid production level. When we
The
did
big
when we did the episode talking about it, I brought up a story about how pundits and gamers alike were making a big deal as if it was this massive revolutionary thing when Project Cars 2 came out in 2017 and had the ability to host private lobbies.
When
Something that's
private
been
lobbies in video games have been around for since at the very least Halo Combat Evolved,
yeah, and
which is a 2001 game.
yeah, and that was the point that I was making. There was also the fact that I believe it was that despite all the attempts to make the game more quote unquote realistic, you had R Factor 2, for instance, have the fucking clown show when they tried to do that virtual 24-hour Le Mans, where the server got publicly put up by accident. The live feed got crashed numerous times. It got so bad that Max Verstappen, who's tearing it up in F1 these days, called the thing out for being a clown show. And the last time that they did this event, he had the exact same set of problems. But instead, their focus was on anything but that, but addressing those issues in the name of making things more realistic.
Now that you mentioned that it wasn't sufficiently the aspect of if someone is still human after all of those cybernetic modifications and whatnot, it made me think of a tabletop RPG by the name of Necrobiotic. Do you know it? Do you know about it?
Yeah, I've interviewed the devs of it. Even though even
Mhm.
though um even though Mitch finds new and interesting ways to make me cringe,
Why? How so?
he's just one of those kind of people who will find new bad jokes that he can make at every opportunity.
Okay, okay. For those of you watching us, necrobiotic is basically that there are a lot of people dying and not enough birds, so they apply technology and science, or rather, they apply science as technology to bring back those people and they explore those issues. But yes, please continue, Mildra.
Yeah. And I do want to cover Necrobiotic in more detail down the road because it is one of those games that's using cards instead of dice. But that is one the cyberpunk one is just one example of that whole mindset. We've also talked about this mindset being an issue when it comes to um the martial and mage divide that people insist on. When you look at a lot of works in various parts of Asia, and that line is not present. Um, during that episode, Zan had talked about how there's just different forms of cultivation.
Hmm. Um, in especially in Wuxi and Xiantia, um, cultivation is usually split between three large categories: cultivating qi, or the internal energy of the body, cultivating the soul or the spirit, and cultivating the body itself.
Hmm.
And cultivators can either cultivate specifically in one and be very good at it, or be a main character, cultivate all of them, and be great at it. Plot armor is a big complaint in in Wuxi and Xiantia, but I've seen enough to know that I still like how the stories are told.
Hmm.
But the difference between a body cultivator and a chi cultivator is in how they cultivate, but not in how powerful they are. A a chi cultivator will project their internal energy to create a massive blast that'll shoot down a mountain. A body cultivator can do the same thing with a punch. There's, in fact, a trope that goes around with body cultivators punching so hard they break space time. It, it's all over the top wild shit, and none of it's consigned to just one genre, one type of cultivation or another. Magic, the difference between magic and martial is so blurred that it doesn't matter. Magic might as well be martial, and martial might as well be magic.
Hmm.
Have you seen
Because we
the role-playing game called World of Ios? No.
World of Ios,
It,
I think I
it,
have.
it's a strange spelling. It's Aious, but it's supposed to be like a Dragon Ball style science fiction game, and it has those crazy over the top things. It's pretty much a modification of basic fantasy. Roll a d100 below a certain number.
Um,
I recommend it.
yeah, I see it now. Um, it definitely looks like it's in one of those cases that's trying to be a kitchen sink of battle manga, though. For what I believe it's the one by RADV Creatives,
Mhm.
and I just wanted to make sure I was looking at the right one.
That's the one.
Um, and and I do think one of the takes on world building that I was very fond of was what we called secret guardians. The original idea was just to try and build a setting that was leaning into what I called the Secret Guardian subgenre of anime. You know, some organization that is
Protecting
hidden in
humanity
plain
from,
sight
yeah.
and protecting humanity from things that go bump in the night.
Like Persona 3, like the Cis from Persona 3.
That's one. That is one potential angle. I'd also brought up the order in D Greyman, the the early interpretations of Soul Reapers in Bleach, um
The
the
Demon Slayers and Demon Slayer.
and the Makai Knights in Garo.
Yep.
Um, what we ended up creating was an organization called the Symposium of Life, who I guess you could call the symposium's members weaponized inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
And mostly because of the fact that a lot of their abilities are built upon some form of artistic or practical expression. Usually drawing upon that power using some sort of focus that's tied to it. Like, for example, a brush that a painter has, or one of the examples we had was a architect's scope.
A musical instrument could also be used to create something like with a song, with a
Yeah.
melody rather.
Yes, absolutely. A musical instrument could be used for the person who creatively sparks their inspiration through music.
Mm-hmm.
But we also we went with some of the obvious and like you said, an architect scope for some of the not so obvious.
Yeah. I think there was one other who had who one other potential concept of someone who had glasses as theirs because they were a bookworm. Because and went with the idea of they transform their mental strength into physical strength. So you can have the motif of someone who looks tiny but is freakishly strong. You know, because it's not like they're spending one to get the other. It's essentially a shift in that particular case.
Mm-hmm.
And more advanced versions just figure out how to use the environment as their tool. Essentially, the ultimate use is instead of using a particular object as a focus, you're using the environment itself as the focus.
The environment itself, you mean like the room of a building, for example?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, granted, doing so is not something you could maintain for long because because of how much focus you're spreading out as opposed to just using something that's relatively smaller.
Yeah, I was just thinking. I was thinking that's crazy control to be able to control the entire. Yeah.
You're still interpreting your own the effects of your own inspiration through the environment. It's not like you're controlling the room like it's poltergeist or something. It could be that you're creating your own little pocket dimension.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think of those attacks from Fate, from the Fate series, like what's the name? Unlimited Blade Works.
Yeah, which is a reality marble where a lot of people misconstrue Unlimited Blade Works and think that it's just a place where he has all of Archer's weapons. That's not what it does. What it does is it gives him the perfect environment to create any weapon he wants.
Any weapon he's ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
which it basically just the reality marble allows him to become the best type of mage that he is ever,
Mhm.
but only within the confines of the marble.
Yeah, and the the thing is with the way we've approached things is that while a lot of people want to have this mindset of you shouldn't draw upon video games or anime or the like, we go the opposite route.
You should.
Largely because I want as many people to play as many different games as possible. And when I see the creativity with people people creating their own fan characters in various works, I am and then I hear them go, "Well, I'd like to try TTRPGs, but it seems too complicated." Then the stuff that I've been doing for the last 9 years is my way of stepping in on that, because not every game, obviously, not every game is going to be as crunchy as what some people think.
There's pretty much a game for everyone out there.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I've mentioned several during this, and I've shown several. I've stated as much, because again, the whole Taylor thing, you know, and when it comes to the FF Legend project, I don't want people to just replicate existing FF, but use that just as much to create their own interpretations of FF mythos through the sandbox that we've created.
Mhm.
We're not trying to give people a Lego set. We're trying to give people the blue bucket that everyone had as a kid, or knew somebody that had it. Something that in the community with Lego is referred to as freestyling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's an interesting question for both of you. Do you think that it's necessary for someone to be familiar with a particular domain to enjoy a tabletop RPG in that style? For example, someone that has never played video games or someone that has never watched anime. Do you think it's too challenging if you take that person and hey, let's play this anime tabletop RPG, or let's play this video game inspired tabletop RPG? Would you think that it is challenging to create the right rules for that style to come to flourish, to be displayed during the session?
No.
No.
No. That's going to be more on whether the game was designed well. It doesn't. The big thing that we've always said, and I know Monk mentioned it earlier, every game is potentially someone's first.
Mm-hmm.
If you design a game with that idea in mind, you will always have examples and rules in the game that will facilitate an absolute newbie getting into the game. Whether that game is inspired by anime and video games or inspired by something else, the inspiration that allowed that game to have whatever its aesthetic is, whatever its impetus for creation is, isn't going to be what dictates whether someone can play it or not. It's going to be how well they comprehend the rules. And so that's why we harp on people who don't give enough give enough guidance in their games. Monk's favorite whipping boy being the Fate games.
Yeah.
Simply because their aspect system doesn't have enough of a guidance to show where the limits are.
I was going to mention that exactly, that you could have an aspect game or a game with tags or whatever, but if you don't explain to the player how you can role play that, yes, there's no guidance, because you can actually have an anime style Fate session, like, as a protector of the hidden portals, I walk forward and slice with my katana, leaving a trace of red light where my blade just passed through, and something, and you get rewarded for that.
And not just that. The example we tend to use as the best guidance we've seen in a game for what we call blank check design, because the aspects are blank check design, is 13th Age. 13th Age has its one unique thing, which is supposed to be one unique thing about your character to make them a little more compelling as a character. and it has this 3-page area. It's only 3 pages ish that shows examples of different types of one unique things that are either not suitable at all because they're too broad, or they rewrite the lore of the world, or they write the game for you, or that have unintended consequences because now you've made a very specific scenario that might be very troublesome for you later, but it might still be interesting to roleplay it. So that type of guidance is necessary for a blank check. When you've got something where you can write anything, you want the guidance to show what's appropriate and what isn't, so you have the boundaries to work in.
Mm-hmm. I've brought, and Fate has the high concept, trouble, and a bunch of freebies, and so much of the design is built around those aspects. But with certain exceptions, like Tianxia, Land of Silk and Jade, there's not a whole lot of guidance as far as what is a good aspect and what is a questionable aspect. Tianxia does do that, which is why we give that one a pass, especially with how it handles its martial arts system, which is a mix of elements and animals that allow you to create a bunch of different fighting styles. This is also the reason why I was so harsh on some of the narrative creation systems that was in Fabula Ultima. I know a lot of people have been singing Fabula Ultima's praises, but I was critical of both that because the pillars that it puts in are way too broad, and at the same time, it purports to let you live out your JRPG fantasies. That's on the back of the book. I know some people say that this isn't that big of a deal. I'm like, no. If it wasn't that big of a deal, it wouldn't be on the book. But the class design, the magic system, the equipment, the tools, the specialized equipment, the monsters, the adversaries, so much of that is leaning towards SNES era steampunkish Final Fantasy. There's nothing wrong with that, but if the type of JRPG fantasy that I have isn't that, let's say it's, for instance, Etrian Odyssey, or Wild Arms, or Star Ocean, or Valkyrie Profile, those are still within that umbrella. But in order to make those work, you would have to do a lot of house ruling. And I know that there are expansions planned. I know that there's one that's supposed to be leaning into science fantasy, but I can only work with what I have. And when I'm covering the core book, as a general rule, I don't try and cover supplements as well unless there is something very specific that I feel needs to be covered. When I reviewed Axe, I had that with the with the player's companion because it had a class creation system in it, and I felt that was important to highlight. And Fabula Ultima's, it has a whole section on world creation, but the world creation is little more than a GM advice column. And after going through world creation with the world quality system that was in Fantasy Craft, you got to give me more than just an advice column for building the world. And I do not accept the whole, oh, they're respecting the fact that the players are creative enough to create their own world. And I'm like, you should not be relying on veterancy. You absolutely should not, because as we said before, every game is someone's first. And there was one comment that was like, I'd rather have that than have 300 pages of lore I'm not going to use. And I'm like, you don't have to go to either of those extremes. You could write like a 5 or 10 page gazetteer of a bunch of bullet points of a world and let the players fill in the rest. That's more or less what every setting that was in Not the End was doing. Not the End had at least 3 different settings. Most of them were like 10 or so pages long. None of them had a map. They just had a bunch of important bullet points and let you fill in the gaps on the rest.
One of my clients for one of my professional role-playing sessions, he just got into tabletop RPGs, and he's trying to run Fabula Ultima, and he mentions that the explanations are a bit lackluster, quite a bit.
And I've seen people get really defensive when I bring up this issue. And part of the reason I even wanted to cover Fabula Ultima is I saw that a lot of people who were covering it had not had acted like this idea of a TTRPG that is emulating console RPGs was this newfangled thing. Whereas I, on the other hand, have not only experience with that, but also experience with Japanese tabletop. So I felt I was in a unique position to cover that, since the Japanese tabletop scene is its own beast. You can't transplant what you might see here in the West over there.
Yes, it's pretty weird. In the case of Fabula Ultima, I am still reviewing it. Well, perhaps you have seen that my reviews sometimes become like a really long series of videos. And whenever I
It's not that
mention,
far removed from our Valley of the Judged series of videos.
and whenever I criticize something about Fabula Ultima, there's almost always someone, you don't know what you're talking about. Fabula Ultima is the greatest.
Which is a really good. Which apparently those people never heard the expression "you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar," or salt in this case, because down here, salt is a way of life. And because of somebody had asked me if would I have that same problem with Fabula Ultima if it established right from the get-go that it was trying to lean towards Final Fantasy VI, for instance. Probably a little bit less so, as long as it put in some sort of gazetteer. I'm not expecting a full-on world dossier with hundreds of countries, lore, and I'm not expecting Gaia Beyond the Dreams or something like that. One of the side things that I wrote for FF Legend was a gazetteer for a Gaia setting. It does. I used a randomly generated map to give myself a direction, and then we filled in the blanks for different ideas with the different countries within it. Some of the and with each of them, there's kind of okay. Here's some of the visual inferences to go with, and then a bunch of bullet points of some important elements of individual countries. And just as a example, it's the document that I wrote out, which is currently 7 pages long. It starts out with the pillars, things like adventuring is a profession, magic is technology, discovery and rediscovery, division of eras, points of light, Aether, and how that works, along with Aether Tech. And when it comes to the nations, each of them has like 6 or so bullet points of each of them. And I'd say one of the examples I'll go with is the Velho Thaumatocracy. We had said that the visual theme is trying to be akin to ancient Constantinople. When it was called that, not Istanbul. And now someone who's listening to this probably has that song from They Might Be Giants stuck in their head. You're welcome. But Velho, I believe we described that one as a magic controlled country.
Yes, that's why it's a thaumatocracy.
Mm-hmm.
I had to make up that word.
Yeah, it's a thaumatocracy. Magic is part of cultural identity. We put in a side note that it's advisable for characters from this region to have ridiculously long Vance-like names for their spells. They are infamously arrogant about the topic of magic. They believe any major magical discovery came from them, even though that's not true. Like they think that they believe that they are God's gift to magic. They have tried to. They're in part of the world that's known as the Old Continent. They've tried to move into the New Continent. Didn't work. And even their governmental pillars are referred to as grimoires.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are certainly no slouches when it comes to magic. It's just that whenever somebody from Velho rants about the superiority of Velho magecraft, everybody rolls their eyes. You know, that one person who it's like the whole thing of how do you spot a vegan? You don't have to, they'll tell you. You don't How do you spot a Velho? You don't have to.
They'll let you know.
They'll let you know, and then you'll wish they didn't, because they will go on about it. But I've said, even if I don't care for the idea of putting unnecessary work on the GM. When somebody's doing a universal game, there's going to be some extra work just by default. There's nothing that can really be done about that. But in terms of this whole, we left this part of it blank so that the players and GM could fill in the blanks. I mean, yeah, people are gonna do that, but you could at least give them some help.
Even Mad Libs has a hint to what blank should be filled with which type of word.
Yeah, there's a little spot under each blank that says this is supposed to be a noun, this is supposed to be an adjective, this is supposed to be a verb, and so on. So and Mad Libs has been around for fucking ever.
Yep.
So why a game designer in the year of our Lord 2024 can't figure that out is beyond me. And I'm not doing some ad populum thing. It's more of if so many people have been able to figure this out for decades, there's no excuse. And figure it out independently of each other. But I don't think you need to have a ridiculous amount of knowledge to get into a certain game. To use myself as an example, you're probably familiar with Legend of the Five Rings.
Mhm.
L5R started out as a card game. The RPG is an adaptation of that card game, which makes me wonder why it took so long for Magic to follow suit, but I digress.
Probably because Magic didn't make a very good TTRPG when they did.
It could have if they didn't just decide to just cram it into D&D, unless we're talking about that Magic Legends ARPG project that never even got released.
I wasn't. I was talking about the Ravnica Splat book.
Well, that they just decided to make Ravnica a 5e splat book.
Yep.
And then forget to do the paperwork with one of their artists, so they got stuck in customs.
Yep.
And then got sent back because somebody didn't do the right paperwork, so they didn't have their passport properly set up. which is a case of glorious incompetence. But
be that as it may.
Mm-hmm. But when I first got into L5R, I had not played any of the card game. Like, I knew about it here and there, but I didn't play it. I wasn't interested in it. I was looking for I got L5R because I was looking for something that was a little more samurai influenced in TTRPG form. Because I was sick of doing the British knights castles and shit. I wanted to go a little bit more eastward, and I I was also running an anime club at that time, and I wanted to see if I could bring some of them in, and none of them were going to be interested in something Conan like or something Tolkien like. They were a bunch of damn weebs, and there was also there was also the fact that they were all fans of samurai films, so it seemed like a natural fit. And I was still able to engross myself in the world of Rokugan. To use another example, I'd imagine that there is a large section of Warhammer 40K fans that have never touched the war game. They're either fans of the lore, they might be fans of the TTRPGs, they might be fans of the video games, but the core war game they haven't touched. Uh, I've when I first found out about Infinity, it was through the 2D20 game by Modifus, not through the skirmish war game. And when I've talked with people who are building games that are built on adapting certain IP into TTRPGs, I always ask them, do you need foreknowledge of the source material in order to play this? And every single time they say no. If it's presented properly, where you have everything that you need in the core book, for instance, or at least the baseline of what you need, the rest will follow naturally. If you build it with the assumption of somebody's already already a fan of this, then you're bottlenecking it. Is how I see it.
Yes, I think there is really no clear reason why you shouldn't use influences from video games and anime into tabletop RPGs, and especially because anime and video games also take some inspiration from that, even if it's in an indirect way.
And they cross-pollinate all the time.
Yeah.
One of the big things I mentioned on other less illustrious shows was that as much as tabletop RPGs have taken from video games have taken from tabletop RPGs, and then they iterate, improve, experiment, and then it goes back to TTRPGs, who then take it, iterate, improve, and experiment, and it goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth like a game of tennis.
Mm-hmm.
They've been passing inspirations forever.
Which is how art tends to work in other fields anyways. Art always is inspired by other art.
Perfect example, Cyberpunk, the tabletop RPG and the anime and the video game, they all connect.
There's also the fact that Pondsmith and just the Pondsmith family as a whole are a bunch of fucking weebs.
We love our Telsorian games around here.
We are very much looking forward to Shadow Scar, and I really want to try and get a hold of and see how that works after seeing that article on Dicebreaker about it.
I think he was sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, can I just say it would be a dream come true if we could get Cody Pondsmith to come onto the monastery?
Oh.
I was thinking, wasn't Artal Sorian responsible for the first anime-inspired tabletop RPG, the Teenagers from Outer Space?
He was responsible for that. Now, whether or not it's the first, I'm not going to put my foot down on that, because it's like trying to put your foot down on what was the first metal band.
Mm.
When you're dealing with that with those in between phases, there's a lot of open to interpretation stuff. And just to use music as an example, I have heard just as many arguments about AC/DC or Black Sabbath being metal as I have hard rock. But because it's in that transitional phase, you could make an argument either way, and you might be right. And that's what makes the whole thing tricky. There's never this one thing that signals that genre shift.
And finding patient zero for a genre shift is basically impossible.
I've talked about how in RPG design over the years there was a genre shift away from the wargaming inspirations and into more unified styles of mechanics. I can't put my finger down as to when it happened or with what game, but it was something that you gradually saw as you got closer to the 90s.
Yep.
This idea of, because if you look at like AD&D, it's a collection of subsystems. Whereas you look at something like World of Darkness, you have one unifying mechanic that everything spreads out from. All roads lead to Rome, as it were.
I was just thinking that I really love those additional black books from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition that further tweak things, because I still love Dungeons and Dragons, but they were crazy than skills and powers and who knows what, and you had even more stuff to fiddle around with.
One of the things from that that I've wanted, that I may consider trying to take in the future, was in combat and tactics. They put in a zone-based system for dueling. It's the only I know that there's games that have zone-based health and the like, which honestly, localized health is not something I'm a huge fan of personally, but that's another story. But the idea of setting aside a system of combat just for replicating that whole smack I challenge you to a duel kind of thing is something I find interesting. And I know some might say, well, aren't there the Iaijutsu duels in L5R? Yeah, but that's not the same as a swash. That's not the same energy. That is focusing up for one attack, as opposed to the swashbuckling style of duel where you're seeing people making a dance of moves against each other. Zan and I are big fans of giving martial characters things to do.
What do you think about the position system for the Dark Souls role-playing game, the 5th edition?
Absolute shit. Zan and I covered a preview version of Dark Souls 5e. I've seen some people say that if they had used AD&D or the like, it would have done better at using Dark Souls. No, any class-based game trying to use Dark Souls is doomed to failure.
Yeah, but the position system itself, not the classes, not everything, the mechanic of position.
Here's the problem with the position system, was that it was creating an issue that didn't exist. Because they decided to position is essentially them trying to combine health and stamina into one thing.
And also poise, technically.
Yeah. And the problem with that is that you end up with situations where you're outright encouraging people to play as defensively as possible because of that setup. There was no reason to obviously you can't replicate the stamina system that's in the games easily, but there's no reason you couldn't just use like an action point system instead. Those have been done plenty of times. We recently did an actual play of Emberwind, which used that, and it uses it very, very well.
We also did a one-shot with Lone Wolf Fists, which when we were looking at the AP system in Lone Wolf Fists, it's almost exactly what I would imagine for a Dark Souls RPG if it were gonna.
Yeah, because of the fact that I even said that it's best to look at the die roll that you have in Lone Wolf Fist as if you have a hand of cards.
Yeah, and of course, it's not exactly an AP system because you're spending the dice, like you said, you're holding them as a hand of cards, and it's sometimes a better idea to hold back some of your dice for when the enemy turn comes by, so you have things for defenses in Lone Wolf Fists. And an AP system based on something like that, where you have AP to do stuff, but you would also need AP for your defenses when it's not your turn, is sort of it's a bidding game, essentially. You bid some for your attacks, but you don't necessarily want to bid everything. Otherwise, you might find out that all in is also all dead.
Yeah. And if somebody really wanted to do Dark Souls in tabletop, Dark Souls 5e is not something I would recommend to them because of the fact that there was no, like I said, there was no reason to not just have health, mana, and stamina. There, I know some people say that's too many resources. So many classes and subclasses in 5e already have their own little sub resource anyway. So so I don't see much of a difference.
I mean, if we're being honest here, um, all you have to do is look at 5e Sorcerer. It has 3 resources as well: HP, which all classes have, spell slots, which all casters have, and spell points for the meta magic.
Hmm. Or you have key with monks, which of course I'm going to bring up monks, and I would say I would also say that again. At the end of the day, Dark Souls is a classless game. What people think are classes are just starting packages for your character. Once you've picked something like that, or gone with the deprived and get absolutely nothing, you
But
can
more
develop
points.
however you want.
Nope. The yeah, the starting classes from Dark Souls are ways that people can influence an early build so that they have a direction to go in, and some starting equipment. But it doesn't tie you into a specific type of gameplay. You can get one of the melee classes, and if you aren't liking it and you found a really cool pyromancy spell, you can go grind out some souls for a while, get yourself enough stats for good pyromancy build, and then off you go. Of course, pyromancy is Dark Souls on easy mode after all.
But there was also the fact that because of like there's been a problem of defensive builds in some of the early Dark Souls games, and I felt that doing this position thing where you're spending essentially HP to do your various actions is skewing things towards uber defensive builds.
I want to mention 2 surprising things. The first one, to fall into the stereotype, I've been vegan for 8 years. So now I have let you know that I am a vegan. The other surprising thing is that when I first saw the whole thing about Dark Souls and the horrible rules that came first, yeah, I thought, wow. But later on, I actually got it just as a collector's item. And I think I can actually make position work, but you need to play the enemies extremely aggressively to the point that the players feel forced to spend those position points to kill the enemy as soon as possible by boosting their attack rolls, their damage. Because otherwise, if they just hang back, which I think it's in most cases, they just hang back and spend no position points, then the game becomes a slug. But if you play as aggressively as possible, applying the description of the actions, the role plays, the players will feel forced to use those position points. But that's
Shouldn't
just
have
me.
to. Shouldn't have to.
But like in the video game, you should use those spend stamina, otherwise you get killed by the enemies. If you play against the bosses, the player versus player, not so much, but against the harder bosses, definitely.
The idea of using position as a resource for your actions, that is not the problem. The problem was that kind of thing was combined with things that it shouldn't have been.
Because I enjoyed that moment when you are out of position points and you know that if the enemy hits you, you're dead. It's pretty tense. Or rather, I also like it that it tends to provide some color to the descriptions. Because, for example, maybe you make your attack roll, the enemy deflects your sword thrust with his axe, and you decide to spend the additional position points. The player can describe that he attacks immediately again, perhaps doing a backhand swipe, like in the game, spending stamina because now you have spent those position points. But that's just me. I'm not saying that, oh yes, they are the perfect mechanism. That's just the way how my perspective.
With everything you described, it doesn't dissuade me from why did stamina need to be fused with health to create position?
Mm.
Like that was the big issue that we had, because this was a problem that didn't need to happen.
Unforced error.
Hmm.
I
to
think the problem was that they saw that Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition was so popular, and they said we need to take advantage of the
well,
popularity.
that's all that Steamforged Games has ever done. Like up until this was their first attempt at Steamforged Games. I think was punching above their weight class, because up until this point, they had done stuff like epic encounters, which are these encounter packages that you can slot into a module. They did a few modules here and there. They've done various minis, but they never did a full on book.
Mhm.
And I think they bit off more than they could chew in that regard. And given how they played the apology tour after it came out, I think they were aware of that. Two, um, instead of some follow up, we saw the next project that Steamforged Game did, an Elden Ring board game.
Board game.
Hmm.
And the new core sets for the Dark Souls board game, like they realized, oh, we messed it up, and now they have the new rules.
Yeah, they got back in their lane. Now, am I saying that it's impossible to do Dark Souls in a TTRPG? No, because I've seen it done. Um, and even in both Dark Souls itself and in Souls likes.
Like
For
Runecairn, I really like Runecairn. Mhm.
Runecairn, I could see. The example I was going to bring up is Fragged Aeternum.
Um, I really don't like the way that the world is portrayed in that one. It's so colorful and enthusiastic. The fiction between the chapters, it's like it felt so generic fantasy, because you take a look at it and you think this is Bloodborne, awesome, but then you have those really enthusiastic moments within the book, and
Um, I I don't as far as the I don't quite get where I, d- I don't quite see it. And because I have my copy of Fragged Aeternum in front of me, and I don't quite see that. There was also the Edge of Night, which was using Powered by the Apocalypse, but made a lot of changes and ended up pissing off some of the hardcore PBTA folks because of the fact that it did things in an unusual manner. Oh, but at the same time, people always talk about PBTA being so flexible. Well, this game decided to be flexible, so no takebacks. Uh, there's there's been there the thing is that with when it comes to doing something like Dark Souls or something like Bloodborne proper, um, any game that uses classes can't do it.
have you seen the When the Moon Hangs Low role playing game?
Yes, I have. I've interviewed its creator. That one, I believe is certainly on the money with the concept. There's oh, there's also been projects that are leaning into that kind of dark style, but not exactly trying to emulate any specific Souls like. One of the big ones that comes to mind is Astro Inferno.
It sounds so familiar. Can you tell me more about it? Astro Inferno.
Astro Inferno is a dark science fiction where, hell's decided to break out, and and now you're dealing with the aftermath of it.
I think I've seen some of a little bit of it, I think.
Yeah. I've interviewed the developers, although me saying I've interviewed the developers isn't exactly narrowing it down much because of how many how many people have been on the show over the past 5 years. Uh, I'd also say even it's it's technically using a class system, but not in the traditional way. Um, I could see someone using Shadow of the Demon Lord to do a Souls-like campaign. And I say not in the traditional way because classes are kind of split into three in that system. Uh, the thing is, if somebody says, "Oh, I want to do a Souls-like campaign," I want, like I said with other things, it's important to nail down what specifically you're trying to do within that. Like When the Moon Hangs Low isn't trying to be a Souls-like TTRPG; it's specifically trying to channel Bloodborne. Uh, I would if I were if I were if I personally were to design a Souls-like TTRPG, I would probably um lean into this art concept I came across about a year ago called the Maiden King,
Mm,
which I've shared that concept with you, Zan.
Yep.
Uh, this was a graduation project by an artist named um, Eika or Xingjia Huang, and it presented this alternate take on the mythos of King Arthur, and I'll put the link to the ArtStation page in the chat that we have. That was this. It was it was a project that they undertook as part of their graduation from art school. And actually, here's the I screwed up and I only gave you the link to the character. There's the link to the full concept.
mhm.
Uh, because because it's clearly using a lot of iconography from from the Legend of King Arthur, but is doing a spin that's different from, say, La Morte d'Arthur or Mists of Avalon. And that is I would rather do that kind of thing to not just because it's something different, but because through that I could emulate aspects of a Souls like without being as restricted.
Mm,
Um, because if I need to use a Souls like setting, there's already one that exists called Embers of the Forgotten Kingdom, and that is system agnostic, but there are adaptations of it for D&D and
and Pathfinder, no? Wasn't it for
um
Pathfinder?
D&D 13th Age and
Oh, okay.
Pathfinder. I think specific there's also agnostic settings like Luminous Echo, but that's a different matter, and that's because I love the work of Wen Yu Li as an artist. Uh,
Mm.
the but the key thing with throughout all this is Souls-like has become its own genre, so saying I want to make a Souls-like RPG is too wide of a net. I mean, just look at Iron Pineapple's videos and how many Souls-like he ends up finding. It used remember Zan, remember when those Steam dumpster diving videos were only a few minutes long?
Yes.
Good times. And the last
Yes.
one is like an hour and a half.
Yes.
Yes, it's a similar situation. Like you can't say just like I want to make an anime RPG, but do you want to make a horror anime RPG or a comedy anime RPG or comedy video game, action video game, etc.
Hmm. Yeah, you've got to nail down what specifically you're trying to aim for, and I do think a lot of attempts at doing that or doing ones based on certain video games are trying to be that more specific. Um, I recently covered a game called Reclaim the Wild, which is a fan game that is trying to do The Legend of Zelda in TTRPG form, but it is very much skewed towards the style of Legend of Zelda that's been in Breath of the Wild. It's while it could be used to replicate past eras, that's not what its focus is. And there's been other takes that have leaned into that direction, anyways. And I'd say if somebody wanted to do a anime RPG, I'd ask, okay, what anime you're talking about? Which ones have you been watching that you want to reference?
And even considering the subgenres, because even if you say like a horror anime, but what sort of horror? Like another horror or King's Game horror? Ha 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 ha.
Or even something like Battle Royale,
Mm-hmm.
or leaning into the type of supernatural style horror.
Or Corpse Party. Everybody loves Corpse Party.
Well, the first one, I really like the first one, but the sequels. Well.
When I covered Shiver, the game by the Menzies brothers, I had criticized the fact that they were trying to do this kitchen sink style of horror. The releases that they've done since are far more specific in terms of what they're trying to do for it. Like their first expansion was all about gothic horror, and was diving headfirst into that. The one that they did 2 more after that. One of them that was meant to be for the wild animal kind of thing, your Jurassic Park, your Jaws, that kind of thing. And another one was built around slashers. So they had a basis, but what they've done in support of it is emulate different genres and subgenres of horror. One of the reasons I find Degenesis so interesting is that even though it's post-apocalypse, it's not trying to be a poor man's Fallout. At least the Rebirth edition. I can't say too much on Primal Punk. I only read through that thing once, and it honestly wasn't very good. And I think even 6 More Vodka will admit that. But it's as I keep saying, it's important to establish that foundation. And this whole establishing foundation thing is before you even consider how you're going to roll the dice. We've seen a lot of people hyper-focus on the die rolling mechanic as if that's what they need to nail down first. No, you build the die mechanic in service of what the central pillar of what you're trying to do is.
Which could perhaps apply to many, if not all, tabletop RPGs, perhaps.
Yes. Now, truth be told, I know some people want to make a big stink about bell curves. I usually hear this when people turn up their nose at the idea of rolling a d20. They're like, "Ugh, the bell curve," and Zan did the math, and the difference between different bell curves is so inconsequential to be irrelevant.
Let's be a little more accurate there, Monk. It's not that I did the math personally. You can compare the bell curve statistics, each standard deviation for the most common types of roll engines, and you can overlap them, and they look pretty close to each other. Not to mention that there have been some fledgling meta studies done about it that show that the difference is not statistically significant.
Yeah,
I want to mention something about the bell curve religious people. Most of them, they have great frustration when it comes to doing something that they want to simulate in an RPG. They never got to do it elsewhere. So they want, according to them, the more the most logical, realistic experience possible. So if they roll a d20 or whatever, and oh, but that's so swingy. What did I? How could I fail that? No, I must hit almost constantly within a certain rate, and you start to learn more about them, and they have great frustrations. So they cannot handle the swinginess of whatever die they decide to hate. So I
Look,
think it's more of a
the
psychological
dice
issue.
gods hate you. They hate everyone.
Yeah. I was about to say, Jesus may save, but RN Jesus does not.
Mhm. The dice gods hate everyone equally, and I find that inspiring,
Or
because
as
no matter where you come from, they will screw you over.
yep. Or as we have shortened it to in the monastery, the dice gods show no mercy. Amen.
And I remember somebody saying that that in regards to that, when it comes to, say, the D20, and they're like, I'm not going to do any D20 based systems because they're too swing. And I'd said, yeah, but you're playing Fading Suns. Are you familiar with the victory point system that Fading Suns uses?
Mhm.
Yep. Which I've lovingly nicknamed D20 Blackjack. But it does something that it does illustrate, and this is a bit of a frustration with me when I see how some people advertise their games, is they'll say, we're using a D6 based system. Okay, that tells me just enough to piss me off.
Told me enough to tell me nothing.
Mm-hmm. Because West End D6 and Shadowrun are both D6 based systems. What else do they have in common besides that?
Nothing.
Like, they don't use them. They certainly don't use them the same way. And this also applies with say, the fact that you're using a D100 in basic role playing and in Rollmaster. So that one of them is aim high and the other one is percentage based. So again, just telling me the die type tells me nothing.
If we want to get even more extreme about it, Monk, if they just say D6, and D6 is a very broad category. Let's compare Sword World to Shadowrun.
With
They
Sword
are
World, you look deeply at these 2d6. These are your friends. These will help you and they will hurt you. But this is the only thing that you're going to be rolling ever.
one of these 2d6 or both of them. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
I think they do that perhaps to try to get people not to get scared with the complexity of the system. Like, oh, it's D6. Oh, yeah, six-sided dice. I know those.
Well, keep in mind with Japan getting a lot of the more side heavy polyhedrals was not easy for the longest time.
Yeah, they didn't have the chance to get a lot of other polyhedral dice.
That's why
Which
Tunnels
is-
and Trolls became so popular with them, because it's all D6s.
And
Well,
Call of Cthulhu and a whole bunch of other games.
Call of
Mhm.
Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu uses percentile because the RuneQuest / basic role playing lineage, which goes all over the place. I don't want to get into that.
Mm.
But portability was also a major thing. And the sole reason that Sword World even exists is because TSR was being an idiot.
Yeah, TSR wouldn't answer Group SNE's calls.
Because for the longest time because they were doing replays like Lodos and the like, and publishing them, and they wanted to make it a bit more official, especially since Redbox D&D was translated into Japanese, but AD&D was not at that time. And whenever Group S&E would call up TSR to try and get the rights, they would either get put on hold or go through a bunch of red tape. And given that this was the late 80s, I've suspected that this would have been right around the time that Lorraine Williams was in power. And I do not know anyone who has anything nice to say about Lorraine Williams because of all the really, really stupid decisions that she made. Although I have seen some people try and defend the idea of making a Buck Rogers game in 1986, which the way I saw it, who the hell was going to know who Buck Rogers of the 25th century was in 1986? Like, if it was 79, maybe you'd have a shot because there was the TV show around that time. But 86, by that point, Star Wars had taken over when it came to space operas. And I think I know some people will say that it was a fine game. The Buck Rogers RPG, there was not an audience for. The only reason it was really made was because Lorraine's family had the rights. And it was using a modified version of AD&D. I had posited a theory that if it was used as a stealth way to reintroduce Star Frontiers, it probably would have had a better chance. Because Star Frontiers was very popular. I'm not going to say it was more popular than D&D, but it had its fan base. It still does. But even with all of that, I mean, maybe there may have been some hardcore fans of the comic strip in newspapers. Okay, that's a massive stretch.
I mean, perhaps they should have focused on Flash Gordon, maybe, but they didn't have the rights.
Yeah, and look, the best thing to come out of that movie was Queen. even though everybody but Brian May decided to nope out after that one song. He did the rest of the soundtrack himself, which is why he was able to get, in the years since, he was able to get work doing soundtrack work. And it wasn't his first time dealing with SF, because he, along with the rest of Queen, were part of that Starfleet project. But and as far as whether or not they would have had a better chance doing Star Wars, I don't think. I'm fairly certain that nobody in the TTRPG space would have been able to afford that license at that time, because this was at the height of the tail end of the original trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
I think the reason West End was able to get it was because it was the 90s and the trilogy had more or less been done, and there was the focus to do the expanded universe. And actually, a lot of people don't give Star Wars D6 enough credit when it comes to expanding that universe. To the point where, when Timothy Zahn was writing the best Star Wars trilogy of books,
the trilogy that introduced Grand Admiral Thrawn,
he needed research material, and Lucasfilm sent him several of the splat books from Star Wars D6. And you mentioned earlier about, speaking of research, you mentioned earlier about how we've done a lot of research. I like to think of it as me channeling Harv Bennett. Now, Harv Bennett, is the source of one of my favorite Star Trek stories. He was the producer for Wrath of Khan, the best Star Trek movie.
The only Star Trek movie.
I don't know about the only, but definitely the best. No one's going to argue that.
Come on!
When he stepped onto the project, which he stepped on mainly because he knew how to maintain a budget. And the first movie, TMP,
Had gone well over budget.
Mhm. He had never seen a single episode of Star Trek. So in preparation, he watched the entire original series and took notes. And if he was able to do that all the way back in '82, there's no excuse to not do that now.
Especially with the internet.
Because
Holy God, research is easy with the internet.
for FF Legend, now obviously Zan and I are big fans of Final Fantasy as it is, so half of the work was already done. But when we wanted to draw from everything, I do mean everything, and that includes going as far as looking into things like the Ultimania books, which have their own hidden expanded details to some of the stories, as well as going through different interviews, which is where we found out about a certain story with Hiroyuki Ito, one of the unsung heroes of Final Fantasy.
Well, where
even
I had known about that story already, so
and diving into several of the mobile games. Now, some of them,
nice
like All the Bravest, we didn't take anything from because All the Bravest sucks. And I know some might ask, does that mean you took inspiration from 16? 16 hadn't come out yet when we were developing things.
16 hadn't even been announced yet when we first started.
Mm-hmm. And by the time things like Stranger of Paradise, Final Fantasy Origin came along, we were already well into developing our pillars. So there was nothing in it that would really that we hadn't already covered.
And do you have any expectations for the official upcoming Final Fantasy RPG?
Funny you should mention that, Monk. What about that screenshot that you got?
Yeah, let me see if I can grab that. Now,
the screenshot is apparently a screenshot from the playtest materials.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't even really tell you any big rules. There's a lot of assumptions or not necessarily assumptions, but inferences you could make looking at this, what is essentially a character sheet, a pre-generated character sheet.
Yeah, because the full book isn't going to come out for another year, and I've said I'm not going to do any content on the 14 TTRPG until that full book is out. The thing that is coming out is a starter set.
Nope. But it at least has its art direction is already chosen for it.
Mm-hmm.
Since it's based off 14. And the pre-generated character that we got looks really clean. Like I said, there's some inferences you can make looking at certain things on the sheet, but we don't really know what the system's going to be yet.
I mean, I know some people say it's going to be a roll high D20, so you've already figured out how it's going to work. No, not really, because as I mentioned before, just because you know that core mechanic doesn't necessarily mean you know how the whole thing is going to work. Which is why I brought up Fading Suns, for instance. But I'll bring up how 13th Age and Fantasy Craft are both using a D20 system. But there are other elements surrounding that system that make it different from how it's going to work.
Like how 13th Age has the escalation die and the whole rolling natural odds and evens for different effects with flexible attacks.
Mm-hmm.
It could also be opposed rolls as well.
Mm-hmm.
The sheet that we found seemed to have static values, and just to go even further into that, I've seen a lot of people who look at what we have so far of Tales of the Valiant and say, this is just a heartbreaker version of D&D 5e. That's not exactly true, because, and I pointed this out in my Unimpressions video that I did, there are certain elements that it is changing from core 5e. The big one I'd say is standardizing advancement. Another major thing is, instead of luck being a feat, luck is a built-in mechanic, one that works very much differently from the feat. But one of the big things that I mean when I say standardizing advancement is, unlike 5e, every single class gets their subclass at 3rd level. This means that some classes get whole new features. There was also the whole thing of the way races work is not the same. So it's one of those situations where I think that the appeal for something like Tales of the Valiant is going to be people who did not approve of the changes that are being made to the whole 1D&D project, and want something similar, but not that. Because I'll tell you, when I quit following the 1D&D thing, is when I saw what they planned on doing to warlocks. It was a case of missing the point by making them just another half-caster.
Mm.
I mean, we've already got plenty of that as is, and taking away the auto scaling spell setup in the name of, oh, you can cast more spells. That's not the point. If you wanted to cast more spells, you'd pick something other than a warlock.
You'd choose a wizard.
If you wanted to cast more spells, you'd choose a wizard or you choose a sorcerer.
No, you'd choose a wizard. You want to cast more spells, you choose a wizard, because we saw that you like to cast spells, so we put spells inside your spells so you can cast while you cast.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to play around with magic, you play the sorcerer.
Yeah, but the point is, all that I know for sure when it comes to the way the FF14 TTRPG is going to work is that the box set has D20s and D6s. Could I infer that D6s are mainly going to be used for damage? Possibly, but I suspect that. I don't know that.
Yeah. Like I said, there's some inferences that can be made from the materials as we've seen them, but there's nothing to tell us what the full picture is going to be.
And because of the fact that I'm dealing with a starter set, I'm probably not going to know how character creation or advancement is going to work, because starter sets usually don't do advancement. That's not the point. There are some that do, but they're rare unicorns.
This isn't Scotland. What are you talking about?
You know what the difference is between the Rolling Stones and a Scottish farmer?
No.
Rolling Stones say, "Hey, you, get off of my cloud." Scottish farmer says, "Hey, McLeod, get off of my you."
You have to say it. Hey, McLeod, get off of me, you. There you go.
Yeah. But I know there's been a few people who are like, are you going to integrate some of the stuff that's in the FF14 TTRPG into our system? No. Mostly because there isn't anything that's going to be in there that we haven't already accounted for. We did certainly draw upon aspects of FF14 when we were developing the game, but we drew aspects from everything. And I've seen some of the new classes that are going to be in the Dawn Trail expansion when that comes out. All of the classes that they're introducing, we can already do, or they're not unique enough to require that. And I said the same thing about Shadowbringers, because somebody was like, "Are you going to make a Reaper job?" And I'm like, "No, we already have a Necromancer, and we haven't designed any of our jobs with any specific weapon in mind."
Yep. You could have a necromancer with a scythe and make it do the same things that the Reaper does by taking another couple jobs that would complement that.
And you're going to be taking multiple jobs no matter what, anyways.
Yep.
And because of the fact that our that we don't have a weapon list, we instead have a tag-based design. it's not that hard to say that the necromancer just has a scythe. And the viper, well, we already have what it's more or less. The weapon itself, that can already be covered with our weapon system. The rest of it is more. We already kind of have what it's trying to do in the form of our dervish.
Yep.
The dervish is meant to be the speed-based sister to the strength-based berserker. There isn't technically a dervish job in any of the video games yet, but we wanted to fill certain niches. So we ended up creating some out of whole cloth, like say the arcanist. The arcanist has been in Final Fantasy, but it's just a different kind of black mage.
Yep.
And
Or
that's not enough.
in Bravely Default, it played around with status effects, which gave us the idea to make it a cursing class.
It doesn't help.
Mm-hmm.
What also helped was the fact that the Japanese version refers to it by a word that basically translates to witch.
Yeah.
And thus we put 2 and 2 together. The there's no Chocobo Knight job, even though there's been Chocobo Knights in the franchise, but we made that in because I want to see a lance charge with chocobos. Damn it!
There's no Dynamo class.
Well,
But we
Dynamo was
created
originally Gunner.
I know, but even then, there were gunners who do what gunners do with suppressive fire, but there was no class that built momentum to spend it.
Yeah,
in that fashion.
Which is what we did with what was originally the Gunner, but we retitled the Dynamo.
We retitled it because we didn't want people to think that it was guns only.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought of a thing that builds momentum to generate energy, a dynamo, literally.
Mm-hmm. And of course, in the process of this, we discovered that there are certain job combinations, because every character is going to take 3 jobs and take a class. There are certain combinations that we discovered that could be particularly annoying, and we thought they were fun, so we kept them. One of our early examples is the Arcanist mixed with Fencer.
Because the Arcanist passes her curses by getting hit, and the Fencer taunts an opponent to make them hit them.
Mm-hmm.
I've always described the Fencer's kit as expanding upon the "I challenge you to a duel" kind of thing. Since once they've marked the opponent for that duel, both them and the opponent get bonuses to attacking each other and get penalized as they attack anybody else.
Yep. Which can be really fun if you have 2 different fencers in the party, and they both challenge the same monster.
Yeah. The Fencer has a bit of an edge in the fact that they have a set of abilities called lunge techniques that they can only use against the opponent they've taunted.
Yep. I actually have to wrap this up because I have to get up early in the morning and I still have to get my dinner. Yeah.
No worries, man. But
thank you so much for being here. Would you like to wrap things up with like the most important message about today or something?
I will simply say that we became geeks, nerds, what have you, by venturing into something that was considered unorthodox from popular society. Why should we extol the virtues of conformism?
My important message is, as the CEO of Sadari Enterprises, I would like to remind you all that the R&D department is still open. We still need volunteers for the newest, let's call it Exoframe project. Yeah, Exoframes. Anyone can come. Do not mind the red juices on the walls. That's just strawberry jam.
The radar has been jammed.
Well, thanks again. The conversation has been enlightening in many ways. And It was truly a pleasure to have you here on the channel. I hope we can repeat this with some other important subject to consider, if anything comes to mind. And definitely, if you ever want to invite me, I am also all up for it. I'm sure I can find some, yes, some way to fit the schedule in there. And to everyone who has been watching this, thank you so much again. Please check out Mildra's channel and Xanatrix's channel as well. Mildra is actually going to interview the Demon Ninja team, right?
Yeah, they reached out to me not too long ago. Apparently because I've gone out of my way to interview the guy behind Dawn Trail, and they're like, "You're doing a good job shining a spotlight on games coming out of Portugal."
So definitely check out Mildra's channel. When is the interview going to be?
The plan is to record that on Sunday, on the 11th. It should be up sometime that afternoon.
Okay, folks. So stay tuned for that. And remember, if anyone wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that is in the description. And has been Abraham El Jaguar, a professional game master. Also, check out the pinned comment for the sponsors, everything else. And remember, roleplay solves everything. I'm going to stop recording in 10 seconds.